Chapter 8:12. Just as I was about to get out of the pagoda, I found a big problem. When I came here, I carefully observed that there were no doors or windows around the Haotian pagoda. I was sucked in by Tai Sui. I wanted to get out, but I didn't know how to do it. Just now, I only cared about advancing to the Yang God's Celestial Master level, but I forgot to ask Tai Sui how to get out of the pagoda. What should I do? Although my cultivation had reached the Yang God level, which was many times stronger than before, the Haotian pagoda was an ancient divine weapon. It was impossible to get out by force. After thinking for a while, I searched around but found nothing. I had no choice but to sit cross-legged and call out Tai Sui's Yang God in my life palace. After the previous cultivation, I had reached the early stage of the Yang God level. After calling out Tai Sui's Yang God, I could hold on for a while, unlike before, when I couldn't hold on for a few seconds. Tai Sui's Yang God was still the same as before, but it was much smaller. It was only the height of a palm. In addition, there was an obvious mark in the middle of its forehead. The shape of the mark was complicated, and because Tai Sui's body was too small, I couldn't see it clearly. I didn't know whether this change was good or bad. Nangong hadn't told me about the specific situation of Tai Sui's Yang God, so I could only study it later. After calling out Tai Sui's Yang God, I drove the Yang God to walk around the Haotian pagoda. In my opinion, since Haotian pagoda could be entered and exited, there must be an entrance. The reason why I couldn't see it now was probably because Tai Sui had set up some restrictions. Generally speaking, restrictions could distinguish the owner. Since Tai Sui had died, he couldn't open it. I could only hope that Tai Sui, who had turned into a Yang God, could still drive the restrictions. I was thinking about this, but after walking around, I was disappointed that Haotian pagoda still didn't move. It didn't even show the restrictions, let alone drive them. I couldn't help but feel discouraged. I couldn't support the Yang God anymore, so I had to take it back. I sat cross-legged on the ground, recovering my cultivation while thinking about this matter. Since Tai Sui didn't work, I could only consider this problem from the Haotian pagoda itself. It was said that Haotian pagoda belonged to Taihao Fushi. If the way to get in and out had nothing to do with Tai Sui, then it must be related to Taihao Fushi. According to the ancient records, Fushi was the son of Suirenshi. They were also written as Mi Shi, Pao Shi, Bao Shi, and Fu Shi. They were also called Shi Huang, Huang Shi, and Tai Hao. They were called Fu Shi in historical record. He was also known as the Azure Emperor and was one of the 5 heavenly emperors. He was the ancestor of the Chinese people and one of the 3 emperors. As the ancestor of Huaxia, Fushi's contribution to the entire Chinese civilization was naturally huge. Legend has it that he created characters and ended the history of knotting ropes to record events. He also made nets out of ropes to catch birds and hunt. He also taught people how to fish and hunt, invented the zither, composed songs, and so on. But among all his contributions, the most important was his invention of the 8 trigrams based on the changes of all things in the world. According to the legends, Fushi sat on the square altar and listened to the chi of the 8 winds, which was the 8 trigrams. The 8 trigrams gave rise to the Book of Changes, which created the Chinese civilization. Because he created the 8 trigrams, people worshipped him as a god and honored him as the patriarch of the 8 trigrams. Hence, this vast heaven pagoda's control method was most likely inseparable from the 8 trigrams. In this way, things became much clearer. However, in the 8 trigrams, Qian, Zhen, Kan, Zhen, Kun, Sun, Li, and Dui, the 8 directions could give rise to the 9 palaces. If everyone was here with Fatty's formation, we might be able to find the clues quickly. But if I were to rely on myself, it would be difficult to find the method in a short period of time. However, when I mentioned the 9 palaces, I suddenly recalled the time when we were in Billows Mountain. We had once fallen into the 9 palaces displacement formation in the forest. Since this vast heaven pagoda was related to the 8 trigrams 9 palaces, then could the 9 palaces displacement formation be related to this vast heaven pagoda? This idea was naturally my whimsical thinking, but I didn't have any other method at the moment, so I might as well give it a try. Thinking that way, I started to recall the trajectory of the 9 palaces displacement formation in my mind. My feet naturally stepped forward. I didn't know how long had passed, but a gust of wind suddenly swept out of the vast heaven pagoda. Seeing this, I was elated. It seemed that this footwork was effective. After a few seconds, the gust of wind returned, but it didn't bring back anything. In a blink of an eye, everything returned to normal. Even so, I had some thoughts in my mind. It was true that this boogang could activate the vast heaven pagoda, but it could only teleport things outside the pagoda into the pagoda. If I wanted to leave the pagoda, using this boogang wouldn't work. I wasn't discouraged. As long as I studied the trajectory of the 9 palaces displacement formation, I should be able to find a way to leave the pagoda. Thinking that way, I didn't dare to be negligent. The trajectory of the 9 palaces displacement formation kept flashing in my mind. However, no matter how I changed this boogang, I couldn't activate the vast heaven pagoda again. As I thought, I had an idea. Everything has yin and yang, and everything has its pros and cons. If I were to deduce it in reverse, I might be able to gain something. Thinking that way, my feet started to move. I didn't think that just as I took a step, there would be a response from the vast heaven pagoda. I heard a whistling sound in my surroundings. Normally, this sound would make people annoyed, but at this moment, it was exceptionally pleasing to the ear. Seeing that there was a sudden change, I couldn't help but quicken my footstep. After 5 to 6 minutes, I finally took a step out of the boogang. When my footsteps landed, a dusky smoke swirled in my surroundings, wrapping my body within. In just a few seconds, the smoke dispersed. The scene in front of me made me happy. Currently, I was standing in the cave outside of the vast heaven pagoda. This place was still as calm as before. I didn't want to stay here any longer, so I walked up the stone stairs. I had originally intended to bring the vast heaven pagoda away. After all, it was one of the 10 ancient godly instruments. This item's power was immense, so it should have other uses. However, after thinking about it, the vast heaven pagoda was too big, so I couldn't bring it along. Furthermore, this item belonged to the Jade Buddha temple. Taking it away without permission was against the rules. If I had a use for it in the future, I would come back to ask for it. 15 minutes later, I returned to the position I came from. I didn't think too much about it. I circulated the shaman energy in my body to both my hands, then stretched towards the wall. I didn't think that my palm would really pass through the wall. I didn't delay any longer. I circulated my shaman energy to wrap my entire body within, then I took a step forward. From then on, I walked out of the cave. However, after I stood still, I realized that the surrounding weeds had all withered. Previously, Shalongpo had said that he would wait for me here, but when I looked around, I didn't see him. I thought that it was because I had been in there for too long. Since Shalongpo was the abbot of the Jade Buddha temple, he naturally had to deal with the miscellaneous affairs in the temple, so he left. I didn't mind it too much, so I walked towards the Jade Buddha hall, preparing to bid farewell to Shalongpo. On the way, I recalled what had happened earlier. The movement of the vast heaven pagoda and the trajectory of the 9 palaces shift in MT billows made me link the two together. The 9 palaces shift formation was equivalent to the mountain protection formation. Moreover, it used the Eastern Emperor Bell as the eye of the formation. The Eastern Emperor Bell and the vast heaven pagoda were both the 10 godly instruments. Both of them had immense power. Previously, when I was in the Peng Lai immortal realm, I vaguely felt that the place was similar to MT Billows. Vast heaven pagoda, MT Billows, Peng Lai immortal realm. There was obviously a hidden connection between the three. However, I only knew about the war between the human race and the monster race. As for what had happened before that, I had never heard of it. If I wanted to know the cause and effect, I would have to ask the sacrificial evil spirit. While I was thinking, I suddenly heard someone shouting in front of me. I lifted my head and saw a monk wearing a red monk robe rushing toward me. As soon as he arrived in front of me, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed several times. Then, he started to speak in a loud voice. Previously, when Shalongpo brought me to the wasteland, we passed by a courtyard, and I met this person. I wasn't surprised that he was so respectful to me. However, I didn't know why he was panicking. While talking, he pointed in the direction of the Jade Buddha Hall. Although I didn't understand what he was saying, from his expression, I could guess that something had happened at the Jade Buddha Hall. Considering what had happened before, I guessed that the people of the Jinshan Temple had come to find us. The relationship between the Jinshan Temple and the Jade Buddha Temple had always been tense. Moreover, after what I had done, they would definitely take the opportunity to pick a fight with us. This time, it was because of me, so I couldn't avoid it. However, I couldn't leave Thailand for the time being, so I had to stay here for a while. I nodded and signaled the monk to get up. Then, I walked toward the Jade Buddha Hall. Before I reached the hall, I heard some noises coming from the Jade Buddha Hall. However, I didn't understand what they were talking about, so I didn't know what they were arguing about. Soon, I arrived at the Jade Buddha Hall. At this moment, I saw many monks surrounding the hall. They were divided into two groups. One group consisted of the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple, including Shalongpo and Alati. As for the other group, most of them were unfamiliar faces, and the ones sitting upright were elderly monks. Their cultivation bases weren't weak. The weakest among them was at the later stage of the Seal Realm. At this moment, they were talking to each other. Most of the noise I had heard earlier had come from their mouths. However, in the middle of these people was an old monk with a white beard. He was resting with his eyes closed, giving off an otherworldly aura. Chapter 8:13. It was extremely difficult to advance further. That was why, after reaching the Yang God realm, the difference in one's cultivation base was like the difference between heaven and earth. Although I had the power to fight against a Yang God heavenly master when I was still in the Seal realm, I didn't dare to underestimate this old monk, who was at least at the middle stage of the Yang God realm. After looking at him for a while, I looked behind him and saw a familiar face. It was Long Po Kue, the one I had almost killed in the forest behind Wulong Baiman Palace. From this, my previous guess was correct. These monks came from Jinshan Temple. They had sent Long Po. It seemed they wouldn't let this matter go easily. At this moment, the two sides were still quarreling, so I didn't hurry to show up. I stood aside and observed the situation. If they had other intentions, I didn't need to go out and look for trouble. Having made up my mind, I deliberately moved closer to the crowd. There were many monks here who didn't recognize me, so I didn't need to worry about being exposed. After a while, the monk who was resting with his eyes closed suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes glowed fiercely as he spat out an evil energy toward Alati. My heart tightened. Had I been exposed? Did Long Po want to use this method to force me to show up? Although Alati and I didn't have a close relationship, I had a good impression of him. Thinking about this, I didn't think too much about it. I leaped and arrived in front of Alati. At the same time, the shaman energy in my body formed a barrier in front of me, ready to resist this attack. Perhaps Long Po cared about his reputation, so he didn't use his full strength. The moment the yin qi came into contact with the barrier, it dissipated in the air. The first one to react was Long Po. He squinted and looked at me, speaking fluent Chinese. "You've been watching for a long time. Finally, you're willing to come out." After listening to him, I frowned. Long Po's strength wasn't bad, but he was also very cunning. It seemed like a simple sentence, but he wanted to sow discord between the Jade Buddha Temple and me. If it had been someone else, his scheme might have succeeded. However, He didn't know how noble my identity was in Sarangpo's eyes. When Shirapala saw me, she looked happy. She bent her body and was about to kneel in front of me. Right now, I can't let the monks of Jinshan Temple know my identity. Since Jinshan Temple is looking for trouble with me, there is no need to involve Jade Buddha Temple. Otherwise, after I leave, the Jade Buddha Temple will not have a peaceful day. With that in mind, I shot Shirapana a look. He seemed to understand what I was thinking and quickly stopped his body. Ality finally came back to his senses. He thanked me softly. I waved my hand, indicating that there was no need to stand on ceremony. Immediately after, I walked towards Long Pu and faintly said, "I don't know why the High Monk of Jinshan Temple has come today." Long Pu didn't seem to like talking with his head raised. He stood up, smiled and replied softly, "Don't tell me you don't know?" When I saw his expression, it was no different from that of Monk Miaojue, which made me feel disgusted. I didn't want to talk nonsense with him. "How do you want to end the grudge between me and the Jinshan Temple?" After listening to my words, Long Pu nodded and said, "In just a month, you have reached the primary Yang God's celestial master realm. Your talent is excellent. You injured my Jinshan Temple's dragon grandmother for no reason. I originally wanted to abolish your cultivation. However, I also know that cultivation is not easy. It is even more difficult for you to have such a cultivation. Therefore, I will spare you today. However, you can be exempted from the crime, but the Jade Buddha Temple cannot escape the crime of shielding you. I need something from the Jade Buddha Temple in exchange." This was obviously his real purpose. It had been a month since I had injured Dragon Grandmother Kuei. Jinshan Temple hadn't come looking for me, but they had come now. It was definitely premeditated for a long time. However, I still had some doubts. The Jade Buddha Temple didn't have a high monk above Long Pu, but it had a high status. Logically speaking, it should have been coveted by others. Jinshan Temple didn't make trouble before, so why did they suddenly choose to make trouble now? If they couldn't find a reason before, it seemed impossible to use my reason now. When a wolf hunted its prey, it wouldn't be reasonable. With the great disparity in power, it didn't even need to use sophistry. Something must have happened recently that made Jinshan Temple lose its scruples. I leaned to one side and whispered, "What happened during the past month?" Hearing me mention it, Lord Shirlong's face turned bitter. He sighed and explained the situation to me in detail. From him, I learned that Thai Buddhism wasn't as aloof as the Chinese Buddhism. Every 3 years, the Thai Buddhism temple would hold a grand competition to determine the ranking of the temples. Due to the special history of the Jade Buddha Temple, it hadn't participated in the previous competitions. The result of the competition didn't affect its status. This year, it was time for the grand competition. Just like the previous years, Lord Shirlong planned to go to the royal palace to discuss the rules of the competition with the king. However, he didn't expect that the king would ask the Jade Buddha Temple to participate in this year's competition. Although the king of Thailand didn't meddle in worldly affairs, his words carried enormous weight when it came to religious affairs. Lord Shirlong was puzzled. Why did the king suddenly make such a decision? The king didn't answer. At this moment, the Jade Buddha Temple wasn't strong enough. In the entire temple, he was the only one with the title of Lord Shirlong. Long Pu had been sent to serve the power of the 9 spirits. He couldn't come and go as he pleased. However, this was the Jade Buddha Temple's secret. It couldn't be disclosed to the public or the king. Otherwise, the situation would be even worse. In a hurry, Lord Shirlong had to use the excuse that all the senior monks in the temple were old to ask the king to take back his order. Unexpectedly, the king was enraged. "If you don't participate, the Jade Buddha Temple will move out of the palace." If the Jade Buddha Temple moved out of the palace, it would mean that they would lose the support of the government. With their current strength, they would be ranked at the bottom among the other temples. Helplessly, he had to accept the proposal. After returning to the temple, Lord Shurlong still couldn't figure out why this had happened. Due to the special status of the Jade Buddha Temple, the other temples had always been jealous of it, especially the Jinshan Temple. It wasn't strange for those temples to use all kinds of means to compete with each other. However, the problem was that the Jade Buddha Temple had always been a royal temple. The entire royal family had always stood on the Jade Buddha Temple's side. This time, the king's sudden change in attitude was really strange. As he couldn't figure out the reason, Lord Shurlong didn't want to dwell on it anymore. Since the king had given the order, the Jade Buddha Temple had to follow it. The final result of the competition wasn't unexpected. The Jade Buddha Temple was ranked at the bottom. According to the rules, the Jade Buddha Temple had to give up its Thai Buddhist first seat. Although Lord Shurlong wasn't willing, he couldn't change the result. He had to follow the rules. However, Long Pu Zhuang of the Jinshan Temple stood up and suggested to the king that since the Jade Buddha Temple had lost its first seat, they should move out of the palace and give up their first seat. When the king heard this, he didn't agree immediately. He said that the Jade Buddha Temple's matter was very important. The royal family needed to discuss it before making a decision. At this critical moment, the people of the Jinshan Temple couldn't wait to come to the Jade Buddha Temple. After listening to him, I furrowed my brows and started to ponder. Lord Shurlong had mentioned that the king's attitude had changed. Combined with Long Pu Zhuang's suggestion, I guessed that the king and the Jinshan Temple had made a deal. I didn't know what kind of enticing conditions Jinshan Temple had offered to make the king give up a temple that was of great significance to the Buddhist sect. I couldn't guess the reason for this at the moment. However, based on the words of Jinshan Temple's Long Pu, regardless of the conspiracy behind them, their objective today was obviously an item from the Jade Buddha Temple that he mentioned. As for causing trouble for me, it was naturally just an excuse. He might be able to unravel the conspiracy behind them by starting with this item. I immediately asked Lord Shurlong, "What kind of treasures do you have in the Jade Buddha Temple?" Unexpectedly, he shook his head and said, "Except for some ancient books, there's nothing valuable in the Jade Buddha Temple." After listening to him, I became more skeptical. Buddhist books were indeed attractive to Buddhists. However, since the Jinshan Temple had been fighting against the Jade Buddha Temple for so many years, it must have a profound foundation. Especially since Long Pu had a high cultivation base, he wouldn't lack Buddhist books. It was obvious that he didn't want these things. Did Lord Shurlong not tell me the truth? When I asked him again, Lord Shurlong gave me a wry smile. "It's a matter of life and death. If there's a treasure, I'd rather take it out to protect the entire temple. I won't hide it." His words were sincere. Apparently, he wasn't lying. However, since the Jinshan Temple had come to the Jade Buddha Temple, they must have some information. Otherwise, they wouldn't have acted rashly. Perhaps the treasure really existed, but Lord Shurlong didn't know about it. Or, exchanging the treasure was just a pretext, and the real purpose was something else. It seemed only the people of the Jinshan Temple knew the details of this matter. However, Jinshan Temple's Long Pu's strength wasn't ordinary. It would take a lot of effort to get information from him. After thinking for a while, I had a plan. I walked forward and said to Jinshan Temple's Long Pu, "We've discussed it. No matter what you want, as long as you can defeat me, you can take that thing. The Jade Buddha Temple won't say anything." Hearing me, Long Pu's eyes flashed with a trace of ridicule. Apparently, he thought that my Yang spirit realm was not enough to compete with him. However, what I said was exactly what he wanted. He didn't talk nonsense and nodded. After he agreed, I continued, "You and I both have Yang spirit realm cultivation base. This place is narrow, so we can't fight freely. However, there's a wasteland behind the Jade Buddha Temple. It's quite spacious there. Why don't we fight there?" After listening to me, Jinshan Temple's Long Pu didn't respond, but Shiprophorus was frightened. He hurried to pull my sleeve. I knew that he was afraid that Jinshan Temple's Long Pu would discover the secret of that wasteland. However, I had a plan in mind, so I just nodded to him, indicating that he didn't need to worry. Lord Shurlong was still worried, but since I had made my decision, he couldn't say anything else. Jinshan Temple's Long Pu pondered for a while, and then agreed with an expressionless face. After that, Long Pu and I left the other people and left the Jade Buddha Temple. We soared up and flew toward the wasteland one after the other. Although the Jade Buddha Temple was big, with our speed, we landed on the wasteland in a few seconds. As soon as we landed, Jinshan Temple's Long Pu's face changed. His eyes were full of surprise and joy. It was obvious that he had found something. I had guessed that the Haotian Pagoda had been exposed. Seeing Long Pu's appearance, my guess was confirmed. Chapter 8:14. This barren land was the forbidden area of the Jade Buddha Temple. Even the monks of the temple could not come here without permission, let alone the monks of the Jinshan Temple, who had been hostile to them for many years. It was hard to know how Long Pu found out about this, but looking at him now, it was obvious that he had been planning this for a long time. From this, it was obvious that the Jade Buddha Temple was not united. Since someone had set their eyes on the Haotian Pagoda, I also wanted to fight for it. After all, it was one of the 10 great ancient divine weapons. It was not right for me to see it wander outside the territory. While I was thinking, Long Pu's expression had returned to normal. He glanced around and turned to me. "Kid, we have arrived. Let's not talk anymore. Let's do it." I smiled and did not say anything. I took out the armor-removing sword, mobilized all the witchcraft energy in my body, and slashed at Long Pu's face. This casual attack naturally could not hurt him, but I just wanted to test his strength. Long Pu seemed to have seen through my thoughts as he waved his hand to repel the armor-removing sword chi before snorting coldly, "Don't waste time. Use whatever means you have. If that's all you have, I advise you to surrender." I still ignored him. I stepped on the 9 stars Heavenly Dipper and attacked him again. This time, I added the power of the Heavenly Dipper step, so its power was much stronger than before. Long Pu finally became serious. He raised his mouth and spat out an evil energy to meet the armor-removing sword chi. In the blink of an eye, the two energies collided, stirring up waves of air that swept in all directions, uprooting all the weeds in the surrounding area. After a while, the smoke and dust dissipated. The two of us were still standing in the same place, staring at each other. Although I did not use my full strength in that attack, Long Pu resolved it so easily. His strength was really terrifying. Could it be that he was already at the late stage of Yang Spirit? If that was the case, it was no wonder that he had ridiculed me before. He did have the ability to do so. The difference between the early stage and the late stage of Yang Spirit was like a moat. If it was someone else, it would be almost impossible for them to be his match. But he met me, so he was unlucky. I have 2 kinds of aura of witchcraft in my body, and I am talented. When I was in the seal stage, I could fight against the Yangshan Celestial Master. Now that I have the cultivation of the early stage of Yangshan, it is not difficult for me to deal with ordinary people at the middle stage of Yangshan. On the other hand, the cultivators of the Wu tribe use Tai Sui as the Yang God, so their strength surpassed that of the Dao Qi Yang God Celestial Master. As for Long Pu of the Jinshan Temple, he cultivated the inferior spells of the outer realm. With the accumulation of many advantages, with my current strength, I am not at a disadvantage when dealing with Long Pu at the late stage of the Yang God. Through the previous 2 tests, I found that the breath exhaled by Long Pu was similar to Yin energy, but it was even more evil. I didn't gain much of an advantage when I fought with my shaman chi. Moreover, there was a great disparity between our realms, so I was at a slight disadvantage just now. If I use the power of extreme Yang, I might be able to restrain his evil Yin energy. This is something that I had already realized when I was fighting against Dragon Matron Kuei, and now I am even more certain about it. After accepting the Tai Sui as the Yang God, My Taoist Qi cultivation also reached the Yang God phase. In addition, the Dragon Qi in the Jade Bracelet is quite abundant. As long as this battle continues, the final victor will be me. While I was thinking, Long Pu opened his mouth again. Unlike the teasing from before, his expression was much more serious this time, and he said furiously, "No wonder you dare to challenge me. You do have some ability, but the gap between our realms isn't as simple as you think. Please enlighten me." I laughed heartily and didn't say anything else. I stepped on the Heavenly Dipper again, and infused the armor-removing sword with pure yang energy. Then, I swung it again. As soon as I swung my sword, Long Pu clearly felt the change in his aura. His expression immediately changed. He was obviously confused. His surprised expression gave me an opportunity. The sword energy in my hand moved even faster, and in the blink of an eye, it reached Long Pu. Only then did he react. He quickly spat out evil Yin energy and formed a barrier in front of him, trying to resist the attack. His thought process was simple, but the armor-removing sword energy was different from before. With the addition of pure yang energy, the armor-removing sword energy collided with the barrier. It was like fire melting ice. The barrier instantly turned into dust, while the armor-removing sword energy didn't lose much of its power. It headed straight for his face. Long Pu's expression turned ugly. He obviously didn't expect that my attack would be so powerful. Hence, he didn't dare to take it head-on, and leaped in an attempt to avoid it. I already had a plan in mind. How could I let him succeed? As he moved, I had already moved in front of him. I lifted my leg and kicked at his waist. Under the pincer attack, Long Pu couldn't avoid it and took the kick head-on. At the same time, the armor-removing sword energy in my hand changed direction and slashed at where he was going to land. With a loud explosion, Long Pu was hit by the armor-removing sword energy again. His body flew a few meters back, leaving a trail of blood on the ground. Taking advantage of his weakness, I didn't give him any chance to catch his breath and followed closely behind him. However, Long Pu wasn't a kind person. He quickly stood up, the anger in his eyes burning. "Kid, I admit that I have underestimated you. However, I will use my full strength. Today, I will crush your bones and scatter your ashes." Although his words were fierce, I knew that his true strength wasn't as weak as what he had displayed earlier. Therefore, I didn't dare to lower my guard. I quickly stopped and carefully watched his movements. Suddenly, a Buddhist tablet appeared in his hand. The appearance of this Buddhist tablet wasn't clear, but just like Long Pu Kuei, the moment the Buddhist tablet appeared, a shadow of Sakyamuni appeared on it. Although I had seen Sakyamuni's shadow in Long Pu Kuei's hands, this Long Pu was at the late stage of Yang God. When he used the same move, the power was incomparable. I became cautious and retreated a few steps. At the same time, I continuously transferred the Tao energy in my body to the armor-removing sword. When the armor-removing sword energy was full, the shadow of Sakyamuni came out of the Buddhist tablet. As soon as it landed, it stretched out its palms to attack me. In the face of the power of the Buddha's palms, I didn't dare to be careless. I stepped out of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper and swung the armor-removing sword. A powerful sword energy rushed towards the two palms. In the blink of an eye, they collided. Although I was prepared, I still underestimated Long Pu's methods. The moment the armor-removing sword energy hit the shadow, it exploded, and the Tao energy scattered in all directions. However, the shadow of Sakyamuni didn't move, and the attack of the Buddha's palms didn't weaken in the slightest. My heart trembled. Before I could react, the Buddha's palms were already in front of me. I didn't have time to defend myself, so I could only jump to the side. Before I could stabilize myself, the Buddha's palms had already landed on the ground. With a loud explosion, a large crater with a diameter of several meters appeared on the ground. Immediately after, the shadow of Sakyamuni chased after me and attacked me again. The previous attack had consumed more than half of my Tao energy. I didn't have enough time to replenish it, so I could only activate the shaman energy in my body and send the remaining Tao energy into the armor-removing sword to meet the Buddha's palms. Using all my strength to defend, the situation was much better than before. After colliding with the Buddha's palms, the armor-removing sword energy didn't collapse immediately. However, it couldn't break through the Buddha's palms either. Unexpectedly, the Buddha's amulet continued to produce evil energy and sent it to the shadow of Sakyamuni. On the other hand, the armor-removing sword energy was in a stalemate and hadn't been replenished. It was gradually losing ground. Seeing this, I immediately reached for the jade bracelet in front of my chest. Taking advantage of the stalemate, I quickly replenished my Tao energy. After a minute, the armor-removing sword energy couldn't withstand the power of the Buddha's palms anymore and dispersed. However, I didn't panic. During this time, I had used the true dragon chi in the jade bracelet to recover more than half of my Tao energy. After destroying the armor-removing sword energy, the power of the Buddha's palms didn't decrease. It took advantage of the situation and headed straight for my face. At this moment, I didn't dare to hold back anymore. I opened my mouth and took out the Xianyuan sword. Previously, I had recovered my Tao energy in order to activate the Xianyuan sword. After I spat out the sword, Long Pu's expression instantly turned grave. Although the Xianyuan sword's name wasn't known to the outside world, Long Pu naturally sensed it in the face of such a divine weapon. While he was frowning, I continued to send Tao energy into the Xianyuan sword. After I had exhausted the last bit of Tao energy in my body, I threw the Xianyuan sword into the air to meet the Buddha's palms. The Xianyuan sword's power was far greater than the armor-removing sword energy. Although I had only poured 70 to 80% of the Tao energy in my body, the Buddha's palms had already been partially consumed by the armor-removing sword energy. After the two collided, the Xianyuan sword easily cut through the Buddha's palms and flew straight for Sakyamuni's torso. At this moment, I finally heaved a sigh of relief. I immediately turned my gaze to Long Pu of Jinshan Temple. At this moment, the Xianyuan sword was enough to withstand the power of the Buddha's amulet. Next, I had to kill Long Pu to completely end this battle. At this moment, Long Pu seemed to have also sensed the danger. He ignored my gaze and stared at the Xianyuan sword. Then, he quickly cut the tip of his middle finger. A drop of blood spurted out and he flicked it towards the Buddha's amulet. Seeing his actions, my gaze also froze. The middle finger was the tip of a person's finger. It was where the heart's blood gathered. Since he had used his fingertip blood, it was obvious that he was going to fight with his life on the line. After the fingertip blood landed on the Buddha's amulet, the originally dark Buddha's amulet was gradually dyed red. In the blink of an eye, the Buddha's amulet, which was as tall as a person, completely turned blood red. Following this change, the Buddha's amulet, which was originally illusory, solidified and was also dyed blood red. After this change, the situation immediately changed. The Xianyuan sword was no longer as sharp as before. It only flew a few meters forward before it was blocked by the solidified Buddha's amulet, unable to advance any further. Although the Xianyuan sword's power was unparalleled, it also consumed a terrifying amount of energy to activate it. Taking advantage of the fact that his previous drive had yet to be unleashed, it was already impossible for him to summon it again. On the other side, Long Pu's face was deathly pale. It seemed that the drop of blood from his fingertip had consumed a lot of energy. In this situation, I still had a slight upper hand. After all, I had only consumed the cultivation in my body, while he had consumed a precious drop of blood from his fingertip. However, this slight advantage could not be turned into a victory. After thinking for a long time, I clenched my teeth and made up my mind. If I wanted to defeat the Buddha's amulet, I still had to use the Yang spirit. If I couldn't defeat the Buddha's amulet, I would still be in danger with its endless aura supporting me. After confirming this, I no longer hesitated. With a thought, I summoned the Yang spirit. In my current state, it was not enough to activate the yang spirit. After summoning it, I immediately sat cross-legged and used the true dragon qi in the jade bracelet to replenish my Taoist qi. At the same time, I quickly refined the remaining sorcery qi in my body and continuously sent it to the yang spirit to support the consumption of the yang spirit. Chapter 8:15. The Tai Sui's yang spirit was fast. In the blink of an eye, it was several meters away from the Buddha statue. Under my control, it stopped. It was the first time I had to use the yang spirit to fight an enemy, but I didn't panic. I recalled a hand seal recorded in the death scripture that required the yang spirit to work with me. I hurried to perform the hand seal. The Tai Sui hovering next to the Sakyamuni Buddha statue followed my movements and performed the hand seal. When I performed the hand seal, I didn't feel any power. However, the Tai Sui was different. In just a blink of an eye, a sharp aura shot out from its hands and dashed toward the Sakyamuni Buddha statue. I didn't expect that the Buddha statue would suddenly show a trace of fear and retreat. This surprised me. It turned out this Buddha statue had a mind of its own. No wonder it moved so fast. It didn't seem like it needed to be controlled. From my experience fighting against the Nanyang Taoist sects, this amulet was similar to the ghost-raising sect's ghost-raising technique. However, I couldn't figure out why Long Pu's amulet had a Sakyamuni statue. It seemed the Nanyang's evil techniques had some tricks up their sleeve. While I was thinking, the Buddha statue had retreated a long distance. However, it didn't wait for its death. It put its palms together in front of its chest and mumbled something. It sounded like the rhythm of a Buddhist scripture. However, I didn't know Thai, so I didn't know what technique it was. A few seconds later, it stopped chanting and slowly spread its palms. I could clearly see a Buddhist swastika in black between its palms. Seeing this symbol, I was startled. This swastika was very famous. In Sanskrit, it was read as the auspicious appearance of the clouds in the sea. It was a symbol of good fortune between the clouds and the sea. It was painted on Buddha's chest, and Buddhists considered it an auspicious appearance because it could emit precious light. It was said to have thousands of colors. The swastika was also an ancient and mysterious pattern in the world. It was worshipped as a symbol of the sun or fire. In ancient India, Persia, and Greece, it was used as a talisman, amulet, and religious symbol. Moreover, this swastika was the supreme symbol of Buddhism, which could subdue all evil forces. But other than that, these words had another bloody and terrifying meaning. Back then, the German Nazis used them as a symbol of violence and bloodshed during their reign. Although the black swastika had appeared from the Sakyamuni statue, it was clearly not the supreme seal of Buddhism. It was most likely a trick of Long Pu's. Nanyang's sorcery was ultimately derived from Huaxia's metaphysic. After 1,000 years, some of the sorcery had changed so much that it was impossible to tell its original form. For example, this swastika was most likely the product of a combination of a certain Huaxia metaphysics technique and a Buddhist seal. No matter what, judging from the aura emitted by the swastika, the power of this move must be very strong. I don't know if my yang spirit can withstand it. While he was thinking, the dark swastika had already collided with the Tai Sui yang god's handprint. In a flash, the two forces exploded, rolling up the sky. Under the tyrannical power, even I, who was far away, felt the impact. I didn't even have time to resist before my body was sent flying. A few seconds later, he fell heavily to the ground. Long Pu of Jinshan Temple was smart. He hid behind the Sakyamuni statue to avoid the impact of the air wave. However, his face became paler. It was obvious that he was also affected. I turned to look at the Sakyamuni statue. The Tai Sui Yang god contained all of my cultivation in the Yang spirit realm. With the help of the handprint, the power that erupted was extremely strong, but the Sakyamuni statue was still able to resist it. It was not easy. This time, Long Pu and I had the idea of finishing the battle in one go, so we had almost exhausted all of our cultivation. Who would have thought that there would still be no winner? The situation was once again in a stalemate. I was not worried. Instead, I was happy. I could take advantage of this time to quickly replenish my Dao Qi and heal my injuries. The true dragon Qi in the jade bracelet was quickly absorbed into my body and turned into Dao Qi to nourish my body. At the same time, my spiritual sense controlled the Tai Sui Yang god to continue fighting with the Sakyamuni statue to keep up the pressure on Long Pu. His situation was different from mine. The amulet that Long Pu of Jinshan Temple had taken out was obviously an external force. After he had taken it out, he had been sitting cross-legged behind the Buddha statue. It seemed that he was also recovering his cultivation. Although he did not have a heaven-defying item like the jade bracelet, he had been recovering longer than me. It was hard to say who had the upper hand. About 15 minutes later, the Dao Qi in my body had recovered by 70 to 80%, and my Witch Qi had also slowly recovered. After advancing to the Yang spirit realm, I did not need to rely on absorbing other Witch Qi to nourish myself like before. Instead, I could rely on the Tai Sui Yang god itself to recover my Witch Qi. After all, the original Tai Sui contained almost endless Witch Qi. After transforming into the Yang spirit, the Witch Qi would not disappear. It would just become a kind of foundation and gather in the Yang spirit. My strength had recovered more than half, so I did not want to continue the stalemate with Long Pu. After all, he was also recovering. When he recovered, it might be another hard battle. It was better to take the initiative now and catch him off guard. With this thought, I stood up and looked at Long Pu. After the previous round of fighting, the muddy ground in the middle of the battlefield had sunk dozens of meters deep. The weeds within 100 meters had also been swept away, leaving only a bare area. Long Pu was still hiding behind the Sakyamuni Buddha statue, sitting cross-legged to recover from his injuries. I took a deep breath and circulated the Witch Qi in my body at the same time. Almost at the same time, the power of the Tai Sui Yang god suddenly rose, and flames appeared around it. In the flames, the complicated mark on its forehead emitted a golden light, as if it had grown another eye. It stared at the Sakyamuni Buddha statue in front of it, as if it had locked on to its target. I pointed at it, and it went straight to the Sakyamuni Buddha statue. Its hands were burning with red flames. In the blink of an eye, it reached the statue and hit its chest. The Yang spirit was very small, less than the height of an arm. When it hit the tall Buddha statue, it was like a moth flying into a flame. It looked like there was a great disparity in strength, but the final result was completely different from what it seemed. The small Yang spirit had the power of 1,000 kilograms. When it hit the statue, the flames around it burst out and covered the entire Sakyamuni Buddha statue. The flames were originally the power of Yang, so they could restrain the dark Buddha statue. Amidst the flames that filled the sky, the Sakyamuni Buddha statue was no longer as stable as before. In the blink of an eye, it flew out and fell to the ground, creating a deep pit. The evil aura around it also dissipated a lot. Seeing that the Sakyamuni Buddha statue had temporarily lost its power, I temporarily stopped the Yang spirit and walked toward Long Pu. At this time, Long Pu of the Jinshan Temple had opened his eyes. Obviously, he couldn't accept the fact that I had defeated the Sakyamuni Buddha statue. His eyes were scarlet, and his face was extremely gloomy. His chest was heaving up and down. He seemed to be extremely angry. When people are angry, they must do something crazy. I was secretly vigilant. I stepped on the Big Dipper, and the Xianyuan sword in my hand fell, directly slashing at him. After filling it with enough qi of the way, the Xianyuan sword qi was dozens of feet long. With just a wave of my hand, the sword qi swept in front of his face. With the sharpness of the Xianyuan sword qi, if the sword hit him, not even his bones would be left. I thought he would desperately try to avoid it, but he didn't. Instead, he closed his eyes. His action made my heart tremble. With his cultivation and means, it was impossible for him to directly choose to give up resistance at this time. Therefore, my heart became more and more serious. The Xianyuan sword qi in my hand didn't slow down at all. Instead, it sped up. In the blink of an eye, it was less than a meter away from him. Right at this moment, Long Pu's eyes suddenly opened, and he started howling loudly. His tone was strange, and it was similar to his Buddhist chant from before, but it was much sharper. It was as if he was in purgatory and was experiencing endless pain. As the howl sounded, thick smoke came out of his body in an instant. As the thick smoke left his body suddenly burst open. At this time, the Xianyuan sword qi finally touched his body, but it only turned his broken limbs into smoke. This sudden change surprised me, and I didn't know what kind of method he was using. However, when I saw the thick smoke that had left his body and was floating toward the fallen Sakyamuni Buddha statue on the ground, I suddenly understood. Long Pu was also a Yang spirit celestial master, so he could naturally separate the Yang spirit from his body. However, the Yang spirit of a Nanyang cultivator seemed to be quite different. Unlike the Huaxia cultivators, who cultivated the Yang spirit into their own appearance, it turned into a puff of smoke. Because of this, I didn't notice it at all. It was obvious that his recovery speed was far slower than mine. Under the Xianyuan sword qi, he knew that he couldn't resist at all, so he had to abandon his body. However, although his Yang spirit had left his body, it didn't escape. Instead, it attached itself to the Sakyamuni Buddha statue, obviously trying to struggle before death. The Sakyamuni Buddha statue was not an ordinary object, and Long Pu's cultivation was extremely high. Previously, he had only sacrificed a drop of blood from his fingertip to greatly increase the strength of the Buddha statue. Now that he had attached his Yang spirit to the Buddha statue, it would be even more difficult to deal with him. Obviously, this was Long Pu's last act of madness. To be honest, I wasn't completely sure, but I wasn't afraid at all. At the moment, it was a life-or-death situation. Neither he nor I had a way out. Chapter 8:16. With all my strength, it only took me a few seconds to reach the deep pit. I saw that the Sakyamuni Buddha statue under the deep pit was shaking violently. It seemed that the statue didn't want to be controlled easily and wanted to compete with Long Pu's Yang spirit. This gave me an opportunity to take advantage of. The opportunity was fleeting, so I didn't dare to neglect it. I raised the Xianyuan sword and jumped down. I had already found the right position, so I didn't show any mercy and directly stabbed the statue's glabella. The glabella was where the life soul was. Although this Buddha statue couldn't be judged by common sense, it was the center. Even if the sword couldn't destroy it, it could still make it lose its fighting power. Moreover, at this time, the two forces inside the Buddha statue were fighting for control. This attack might seriously injure both of them at the same time, which would save me trouble later. Unfortunately, when the Xianyuan sword was only a few centimeters away from the glabella, the Buddha statue suddenly stopped shaking, and its eyes became much clearer. It was obvious that Long Pu's Yang spirit had completely controlled the Buddha statue. In this way, I didn't waste any more time. I increased the strength of my hand and stabbed the sword forward. After seizing control, under Long Pu's control, the Sakyamuni Buddha reacted faster. When the Xianyuan sword fell, he raised his hand and grabbed the sword. The Xianyuan sword was an ancient divine weapon. Even if I didn't send my Taoist qi into it, its power to expel evil spirits could still make the Buddha statue suffer. In just a few seconds, thick smoke billowed from the Buddha statue's palm, and its expression was very distorted. However, this action also neutralized my attack and gave me a chance to breathe. He grabbed the Xianyuan sword with great strength and didn't let go no matter how hot it was. I couldn't take it back for a while. After a while, he roared and increased the strength of his hand. With a sudden swing, he threw me away. I wasn't discouraged even though my attack didn't hit. While my body was flying backward, I controlled the yang spirit to step forward and use the previous method. My whole body was covered in flames. Compared with the first time, the yang spirit was more skillful in controlling the flames. The temperature in the flames was also more terrifying. Even the surrounding air seemed to be twisted by the heat, and ripples spread all around. Although I was dozens of meters away from it, I still felt a strong burning sensation. At this moment, the Buddha statue had yet to stand up, but waves of wailing could be heard coming from the bottom of the pit. The taste of being roasted must be unbearable for the Buddha statue. Relying on the power of flames alone was naturally not enough to completely destroy the Buddha statue. Accompanied by a miserable howl, the Buddha statue once again stood up shakily amidst the billowing smoke. Its entire body was in tatters, and it had long since lost its previous arrogant appearance. The strange thing was, although it looked miserable, it seemed to have adapted to the temperature of the flames. Standing in the middle of the flames, its face no longer looked like it was in pain. Instead, it looked a bit crazed. It beat its chest and stamped its feet as if it had gone mad. A few seconds after its arms were covered in gray mist, it suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a dark pearl that was wrapped in an evil aura. This bead was oval in shape, and it was spat out from the mouth of the Sakyamuni Buddha statue. It looked very much like the Buddha Sarira of Buddhism. The Buddhists emphasized that relics were related to the merits of cultivation. Generally speaking, only eminent monks who had comprehended the Great Way would leave relics for the world to worship after they passed away. The Buddha relic not only contained profound Dharma, but also a powerful Buddhist power. I heard from Nangong that he had found a Buddha relic to turn old Master Yuan's corpse into the appearance of a monk. From this, it could be seen that this Buddha relic also had the ability to reverse yin and yang. However, I didn't expect that the Sakyamuni Buddha statue could give birth to a Buddha Sarira. Considering the situation before and after, it's very likely that Long Pu's yang spirit used some kind of method to create such a thing. Recently, I've had a lot of dealings with the Buddhists, so I have a good understanding of them. Although the Buddha relic has different colors and different powers, I've never heard of a dark relic. Looking at the evil aura of this relic, it doesn't have the benevolence of the Buddhists at all. Therefore, the Buddha relic of the Sakyamuni Buddha statue is just another form of evil. As the saying goes, evil can never defeat good. This dark relic is just an unorthodox method, so I'm not afraid. Since I can deal with the Sakyamuni Buddha statue, it's not a big deal to have another Buddha relic. At this moment, the dark relic was spinning rapidly in the air. After a while, it flew toward my Tai Sui Yang spirit. Although I'm confident, I don't dare to be careless. My hands are constantly making hand seals, and the witchcraft and Taoist qi in my body are also moving crazily. I control my yang spirit to stimulate the flames around it. Instead of retreating, I attack the dark relic. Since this relic also has a thick evil aura, it should be restrained by the flames of my Tai Sui Yang spirit. That's why I didn't change my plan. However, the result was not as optimistic as I had thought. The red flames that the Tai Sui Yang spirit had summoned were as brittle as bubbles when they met the relic. In the blink of an eye, most of them were extinguished. Then, I realized that the dark relic didn't seem to be afraid of the pure yang power. Just like a moment ago, when the Sakyamuni Buddha statue had spat out the Buddha relic, it was no longer afraid of the flames. It didn't mean that the dark relic could restrain the pure yang power. In fact, the yin and yang powers restrained each other. It's just that the degree was different. Previously, the pure yang power of the Tai Sui Yang spirit was stronger, and the Sakyamuni Buddha statue was restrained. Now, the evil aura in the dark relic was stronger, and the pure yang power of the Tai Sui Yang spirit was restrained. I understood the reason, but I didn't have time to use other methods in a hurry. But even I didn't expect that the Tai Sui Yang spirit would suddenly change at this time. From the mark on its forehead, a golden beam of light suddenly shot out and met the dark relic. In the blink of an eye, the two collided. Immediately, the evil aura around the relic was dispersed. A few seconds later, under the golden light, the Buddha relic exploded, turning into black smoke and dissipating in the waves of air. As the dark relic exploded, the Sakyamuni Buddha statue was sent flying. Its blood-red skin gradually returned to its original appearance, and its solid body turned into a phantom once again. Seeing this, I was shocked. The Buddha relic was obviously Long Pu's trump card. He had to risk his life to use it. At first, I had underestimated his power and was almost taught a lesson. I didn't expect that the Buddha relic would be destroyed under the golden light of the mark on the Tai Sui Yang spirit's head. In this way, Jinshan Temple's Long Pu had no more tricks up his sleeve. I looked at the Sakyamuni phantom again. It was much fainter than before. Obviously, it couldn't fight back anymore. Just as I heaved a sigh of relief, a mass of black mist suddenly rose from the Sakyamuni phantom and flew away. Jinshan Temple's Long Pu was trying to escape. I was already prepared, so how could I let him escape so easily? The moment it left, I leaped into the air and arrived in front of it even though I had started later. Long Pu's ferocity didn't diminish. Seeing that I had intercepted him, he directly rushed toward me. I was waiting for him with the Xianyuan sword in my hand. Seeing this, I moved the sword to the side and slammed him to the ground. At this time, Long Pu's Yang spirit was like an arrow at the end of its flight. After being injured, he couldn't escape. I landed on the ground and reached out to grab the black mist. I didn't think much and directly used the soul-searching technique to extract all the memories in his soul. With my current cultivation, it was difficult for me to search the soul of Long Pu, who was at the late stage of Yang spirit. After all, his cultivation was higher than mine. However, after the previous fierce battle, not only was his body damaged, but his Yang spirit was also at the end of its flight. Facing my soul-searching technique, he couldn't resist at all and could only let me do it. Soon, I finished the soul-searching technique. Since his Yang spirit was useless to me, I controlled the Xianyuan sword to destroy his Yang spirit. As his Yang spirit disappeared, the Buddhist medallion that had summoned the Sakyamuni Buddha statue also broke and scattered on the ground like rubble. After killing Long Pu, I turned my head and observed the surroundings for a while. After confirming that there were no more threats around, I relaxed and carefully examined the information I had just obtained from Long Pu's soul. Long Pu's name was Long Pu Zhuang. He was the monk from Jinshan Temple who had suggested to the king that the Jade Buddha Temple should leave the palace. The reason he had done that was because Jinshan Temple had reached an agreement with the king. The agreement was that Jinshan Temple would replace the Jade Buddha Temple as the chief temple of Thai Buddhism. In return, Jinshan Temple would help the king obtain some kind of treasure from the Jade Buddha Temple to prolong his life. The king of Thailand was over 70 years old, and his body was weak and sickly. He knew that he didn't have much time left, and ordinary medical treatments wouldn't work. He could only kneel and pray to the Buddha to prolong his life. However, it didn't work for several years. He could only sit and wait for the day of his life to end. At this moment, Long Pu Zhuang of Jinshan Temple took the chance to tell the king that the Jade Buddha Temple had a magical treasure that could reverse yin and yang. It could cure diseases, relieve pain, and prolong one's life. The king was already disheartened. When he heard this news, he felt like he had found a life-saving straw. How could he not be happy? Of course, although he was excited, he still kept his mind. After some discreet investigation, he found that what Long Pu Zhuang had told him was true. Once the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple became Long Pu, they would go to a mysterious place to continue their cultivation. They wouldn't show up for hundreds of years. However, people had confirmed that they were still alive. The king was very excited when he learned about this. However, he also understood that since the treasure was so precious, the Jade Buddha temple wouldn't hand it over easily. Thailand was a religious country. Buddhists accounted for 90% of the population, and the king was just a symbol of the country. He didn't have much real power. Moreover, the Jade Buddha temple was the chief temple of Thai Buddhism. If the Jade Buddha temple didn't hand over the magical treasure, the king couldn't do anything to it. However, this was a matter of life and death. This might be the only way to prolong his life, so he wouldn't give it up easily. The king thought about it again and again. He felt that this was a serious matter, and he didn't have the power to participate in it. He could only borrow the power of Thai Buddhism. He knew that the Jinshan temple must have a motive for providing this information. In terms of strength, the Jinshan temple and the Jade Buddha temple were on par. It was not impossible to use the Jinshan temple to fight against the Jade Buddha temple. Long Pu Zhuang already knew what the king was thinking, so he took the opportunity to tell the king his plan. Since then, the king ordered the Jade Buddha temple to participate in the Buddhist competition. Then, Long Pu Zhuang used the reason that the Jade Buddha temple was ranked last in the competition to suggest to the king that the Jade Buddha temple should move out of the Grand Palace and let the new chief temple take over. The Jinshan temple had a deep foundation, so the new chief temple naturally fell on its head. As long as the Jinshan temple moved into the Grand Palace, the magical treasure would be easily obtained by the king. However, this matter was of great importance, so the king had to put on an act to not let others notice anything unusual. He didn't agree in a hurry, so he delayed it until now. Today, the Jinshan temple's monks came to find me to settle the previous matter, and to exert pressure on the Jade Buddha temple, making them move out of the Grand Palace. Seeing this, Long Pu Zhuang's soul didn't have any more useful information. I wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, I stared in the direction of the clear sky pagoda and pondered. Previously, I had guessed that the magical treasure that Long Pu Zhuang mentioned was undoubtedly the clear sky pagoda. From the information he had just obtained, he didn't even know the effects of the clear sky pagoda. I was afraid that it was just hearsay. Chapter 8:17. Long Pu Zhuang had already been killed, and now wasn't a good time to get the clear sky pagoda. Why not send the other people from Jinshan temple away, and do Jade Buddha temple a favor? Then, there would be less resistance to get the clear sky pagoda. Thinking about that, I prepared to return to Jade Buddha Hall. Just as I took 2 steps, there was a loud explosion behind me. I turned around and saw that the ground behind me had split open. Soil flew in all directions. After the soil layer broke open, I felt a familiar aura. It was the clear sky pagoda. Did someone activate the clear sky pagoda? That was the first thought that came to my mind, but I immediately denied it. The hole that the clear sky pagoda was in was 100 meters from the ground. Even if someone activated the clear sky pagoda, there shouldn't be such a huge commotion. What happened? I was shocked and hurried over to take a look. However, just as I lifted my leg, the area where the ground had collapsed completely, and the top of the clear sky pagoda popped out of the ground. The clear sky pagoda was about to break out of the ground. Before I could react, the clear sky pagoda continued to rise. Very quickly, the entire pagoda appeared, and it didn't stop. It actually flew up from the ground and flew into the sky. I was confused. Did the godly weapon have a spirit and realized that someone was plotting something, so it flew away on its own? Such a guess was too idealistic. I hesitated for a moment before gritting my teeth and chasing after it. Compared to the godly weapon having a spirit, I was more willing to believe that someone activated the clear sky pagoda in the dark, and took advantage of the fight between me and Long Pu Zhuang to get it and bring it away. Naturally, I wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. I instantly raised my speed to the maximum and headed for the clear sky pagoda. However, what I didn't expect was that the clear sky pagoda's flying speed became faster and faster. At the start, I could still see traces of it, but after a few seconds, it actually disappeared and became a black dot in the distant sky. With such speed, I couldn't even follow it with my naked eye, so how could I fight for it? When the clear sky pagoda's aura completely disappeared from my senses, I sighed helplessly and stopped chasing. I followed the original path and returned to Jade Buddha Temple. After witnessing the clear sky pagoda's speed, I had to admit that the godly weapon had a spirit. That speed just now wasn't something that a human could achieve. Since it's like this, it can only prove that this vast heaven pagoda is not fated with me. My thoughts of attempting to snatch it previously also faded considerably at this time. I stopped fantasizing about the clear sky pagoda and returned my thoughts to the battle between Jade Buddha Temple and Jinshan Temple. At this moment, the clear sky pagoda had already disappeared. Regardless of what the people of Jinshan Temple were thinking, they weren't prepared to have any result. Thus, I didn't intend to participate in this matter. I only needed to inform Wet Dragon Granny about the disappearance of the clear sky pagoda. After all, I was the only eyewitness. It's just that what I saw was too unbelievable. If I told Wet Dragon Granny, I'm not sure if he would believe me or not. Of course, I did not take his attitude to heart, and it did not matter whether I believed him or not. While pondering, I quickly returned to the Jade Buddha Hall. At this moment, the people of the Jade Buddha Temple and the Jinshan Temple were still waiting anxiously. When they saw me return, they were thrilled. How did the battle go? Previously, when the clear sky pagoda flew away, although there was a huge commotion, to the people waiting here, they clearly thought that it was the commotion caused by the battle between me and the Pure Dragon Manor. They didn't know that something had happened to the clear sky pagoda. I first told them about the massacre of the Pure Dragon Manor. After hearing the result, the joy on Wet Dragon Granny's face became thicker. The monks of Jinshan Temple were dumbstruck. It seemed they couldn't believe the result. However, the fact that I was standing here and the Pure Dragon Manor didn't show up was enough to prove everything. After telling them the result, I didn't think much and told him everything about the clear sky pagoda. The joy on Wet Dragon Granny's face froze. It seemed he couldn't react in time. After a long while, he screamed, "How could it be?" I didn't have an answer to this question, so I couldn't answer him. At this moment, the monks of Jinshan Temple had woken up from the shock. They glared at me with resentful eyes. Some of them were cursing and talking in Thai. I didn't understand them, so I didn't pay attention to them. However, a monk used his broken Chinese to threaten me. Master Zhao Kun will know about this soon. At that time, I won't be able to escape. Jinshan Temple had Zhao Kun, and I knew that. After killing the Pure Dragon Manor, I didn't plan to stay in Thailand. Now that the clear sky pagoda had disappeared, I didn't have any reason to stay here. Even if Zhao Kun was strong, I didn't believe he would dare to come to China to kill me. At their realm, if they dared to intrude China, the old men in the Peng Lai immortal region wouldn't spare them. That was why I wasn't worried. I just sneered and looked at the people of Jinshan Temple. If they didn't give up, I didn't mind keeping them here. Seeing my unfriendly face, the monks of the Jinshan Temple reacted. They shut their mouths and snorted at me. Then, all of them left the Jade Buddha Hall without saying goodbye. After they had left, Shipropo came to me. It seemed he wanted to ask me about the clear sky pagoda. However, he looked at me and opened his mouth. However, he didn't say anything. No matter what he thought, I had decided to leave. I told him everything about the Pure Dragon Manor's plot. I asked him to tell the King of Thailand that the thing they wanted had disappeared. Even if they destroyed the Jade Buddha Temple, it wouldn't change anything. As long as the king didn't want this, Jinshan Temple wouldn't be able to touch the Jade Buddha Temple, not even if they had Zhao Kun. I didn't need to stay here anymore. I waved my hand and didn't wait for Shipropo to reply. I left the Jade Buddha Hall. After leaving the Jade Buddha Temple, I planned to return to China on foot. Since I had just reached the Yang God realm, I needed some time to stabilize my cultivation base. Although it was far from China with my cultivation base, it would only take me half a month to get there on foot. I wanted to use this time to study the things I had learned recently. I was sure my power would increase to the next level. As soon as I had this thought in my head, I sensed something in Shangliu's bag. I released my spirit sense to check. It was a message from the sound-transmitting talisman. My mind flickered, and the talisman appeared outside Shangliu's bag. From its aura, I knew it was Zhang Kanwen. After I unfolded the talisman, a line of small words appeared in my eyes. People from Mount Longhu are here. Come back. Mount Longhu? Why did this group of haunting fellows suddenly come to find him again? I was worried and hurried to send a message to ask about the situation. However, Zhang Kanwen didn't reply even after I sent the message. The situation was so urgent that Zhang Kanwen couldn't tell me the details. I didn't want to return to China on foot anymore. I rushed to the airport and flew to Shenzhen. On the way there, I kept sending messages to Zhang Kanwen. However, I didn't get any response even after the plane landed. After leaving the airport, I immediately soared into the sky. It was a half-hour drive, but with my full speed, it only took me a few minutes to return to the Feng Shui metaphysics shop. Before I entered the shop, I sensed a strong Taoist aura on the upper floor. It was the Yang God Celestial Master from Mount Longhu. This person's cultivation base was higher than mine, so I couldn't sense his realm. However, from his aura, he was almost the same as the one from Dragon Village. I guessed he was at the middle or late stage of the Yang God Celestial Realm. Besides that, after carefully checking, I sensed Zhang Kanwen's weak aura. I felt a little relieved. From his aura, I knew he was hurt badly. However, as long as his life wasn't in danger, it was a good thing. I didn't have time to enter the shop. I directly flew to the window on the second floor, kicked the window open, and jumped into the shop. Although I had expected it, I was still enraged when I saw the scene in the room. At this moment, all the furnishings in the room were destroyed. Zhang Kanwen was lying on the ground. Blood kept gushing from his mouth and nose. A white-bearded Taoist priest was sitting on the sofa. There were only the two of them in the room. Xie Lu and the others were nowhere to be seen. Seeing me come in, the white-bearded Taoist priest looked at me with interest. He said faintly, "I've been waiting for you for a long time. You're finally back." I didn't have time to pay attention to him. I quickly walked toward Zhang Kanwen to check his injuries. Zhang Kanwen's injuries were serious. His mouth was blocked by a blood clot, so he could only make muffled sounds. However, he still pointed at the white-bearded Taoist priest sitting on the sofa, signaling me to be careful. I knew he was worried that I wasn't the Taoist priest's match. I sighed and whispered to him, "Brother Zhang, don't worry. I'll deal with him." Zhang Kanwen and I knew each other well. After hearing my words, he seemed to be relieved. His body softened and he fainted. It wasn't a good time to treat Zhang Kanwen's injuries. I summoned Tong Tong and asked her to take care of Zhang Kanwen. Then, I stood up and looked at the white-bearded Taoist priest. In a low voice, I asked, "You guys from Mount Longhu are haunting me. Why have you come to my shop?" The old Taoist had a calm expression on his face. After glancing at my pupils, he turned to me and said, "It's not that I'm haunting you, but you killed the Taoist of Mount Longhu first. Could it be that I can't demand an explanation from you?" "Taoist?" I frowned. I had seen the Taoist of Mount Longhu before, but it was in Chiyo's skull tomb. I remembered that the Taoist of Mount Longhu, Lu Zhenyang, and the others were all trapped in Chiyo's tomb. It had been a long time, so who knew how they were doing? Fortunately, Lu Zhenyang had the evil spirit to help him comprehend his inheritance. As for the people from Mount Longhu, they were most likely dead. In a sense, I was the one who killed the Taoist. However, they had attacked me first, so I couldn't be blamed for fighting back. As for the people from Mount Longhu, it was most likely the Taoist child that I had released when I left Chiyo's tomb. After he returned to the mountain, he explained the situation to the people from Mount Longhu. That Taoist child was innocent, and I wasn't someone who would kill indiscriminately. I didn't kill him to keep his mouth shut. Now that I was being pursued, it was reasonable. In fact, I had this concern back then, so I returned to my shop for a while. However, I didn't see any movement from Mount Longhu, so I thought that they wouldn't come again. That's why I came here today. Chapter 8:18. The old Taoist didn't feel offended after seeing my tit-for-tat. Instead, he chuckled and continued, "It's true that knowing someone by their reputation isn't as good as meeting them in person. You're really arrogant. Forget it. Our Mount Longhu has always been fair. Daozi, this matter isn't entirely your fault. In fact, the Lu family's kid is more guilty. According to what I know, you and Lu Zhenyang are mortal enemies. How about this, you tell me Lu Zhenyang's whereabouts, and I'll go find him to understand the situation before deciding the two of you. What do you think?" His words were reasonable, and even had a hint of pity in them. However, I was shocked. Mount Longhu has always been fair? How could he say such shameless words in such a serious manner? Apart from being shameless, I was also surprised that he would ask about Lu Zhenyang's whereabouts. Back in Chiyo's tomb, the people of Mount Longhu had obviously reached an agreement with Lu Zhenyang to deal with me. Daozi's whereabouts had disappeared. From what the old Taoist said, it seemed that Mount Longhu had placed their focus on Lu Zhenyang. In order to find Lu Zhenyang's whereabouts, they would even let me go. This was really unimaginable. There must be a reason for something that was beyond common sense. Mount Longhu had to have a reason for wanting to find Lu Zhenyang. And this reason was obviously more important than me. What did Lu Zhenyang have? The power of Mount Longhu could be said to be one of the best in the world of metaphysics. Although Lu Zhenyang had received Chiyo's inheritance and the Chiyu axe, these things alone weren't enough for Mount Longhu to covet. From the current situation, it was clear that Mount Longhu had a bigger plan. After thinking for a while, I couldn't figure out what the people of Mount Longhu were planning. However, no matter what they were planning, I didn't want them to succeed. Thus, even though I knew that Lu Zhenyang was most likely still in Chiyo's tomb, I still shook my head. "Since you know that we are archenemies, you don't dare to come and ask me. If I knew his whereabouts, I would have already gone there and killed him. You wouldn't even have the chance to ask me." After hearing my words, the old Taoist was startled, as though he had acknowledged my words. However, after a moment, he shook his head and said, "That's impossible. A few days ago, we searched everywhere for people who were proficient in divination to divine Lu Zhenyang's location. All the signs pointed to you. No matter how you look at it, the results of the physical examination can't be wrong. There must be a clue on you." Test? I furrowed my brows. Just what was Mount Longhu planning? They invited all the divination experts in the world, just to find Lu Zhenyang. Without waiting for me to understand, the old Taoist priest changed his expression and continued to say to me, "Little friend Zhou, I admit that there was some conflict between you and our dragon Tiger Mountain, but that was then and this is now. We are looking for Lu Zhenyang because we want to cause trouble for him. You and he are mortal enemies. As long as you tell us his location, we will help you take revenge. Such a good thing, why wouldn't you be happy? Just because of our previous transgressions, you don't want to give up such a great opportunity to take revenge?" I was speechless. This young god celestial master of Mount Longhu was really shameless. In order to get information, he would do anything. Just now, he looked like he wanted to kill me, but now, he became little friend Zhou and said that he wanted to take revenge for me. At that moment, I didn't know what to say. While I was stunned, the old Taoist priest seemed to want to persuade me again. However, his expression suddenly changed and he said in shock, "You don't want to reveal Lu Zhenyang's location. Could it be that you have already taken the key?" After saying this, he suddenly came to a realization and said, "That's right. You have no reason to protect Lu Zhenyang. The reason why you didn't say it must be that you already have the key and are afraid that we will find out. Good lad, you actually have such a scheming mind." I wasn't unfamiliar with this word. Back then, in the Yinshang royal tomb, the woman that appeared from the bronze coffin, including Yi Pianpian and Yi Maolan, were the keys to the legendary gate of eternal life. The word that the old Taoist mentioned was naturally referring to this key. However, from what he said, it seemed that Lu Zhenyang had the key. I frowned and reacted. After coming out of the Yinshang royal tomb, the celestial masters of Taoism, Xian Dao and Longhu Mountain, a total of 18 people, all died. At first, I thought that it was the evil sacrificial spirit who did it. Later on, I heard him say that it wasn't. Moreover, Lu Zhenyang came back to life, so I guessed that it was Lu Zhenyang who killed those people. Now that I heard the old Taoists say that the key was in Lu Zhenyang's hands, it was basically confirmed that Lu Zhenyang killed those people, and that woman ended up in Lu Zhenyang's hands. The old Taoist in front of me, or rather, Longhu Mountain, came to find me to find Lu Zhenyang, or rather, to find the key in Lu Zhenyang's hands. It was no wonder why his attitude had changed so much. He had threatened and tempted me. It turned out that everything was because of the so-called key. As soon as I understood the secret, the old Taoist grinned fiendishly. He didn't look as friendly as before. With a cold voice, he said, "That kid from the Lu family used the key to cooperate with us. However, he didn't want to give us the key. I didn't expect that he would end up in Chio's tomb. If he had given the key to Longhu Mountain earlier, you wouldn't have had the chance to reap the benefits." After listening to him, I couldn't help but wryly smile. This was the right attitude. Not distinguishing between right and wrong, and not listening to reason, that was how people of Longhu Mountain acted. I didn't want to explain to him. No matter what he wanted, I only knew that the people of Longhu Mountain had chased us to the Feng Shui metaphysics shop and even injured Zhang Kanwen. No matter what their purpose was, I wouldn't let this old Taoist go that easily. As for the immortal gate and the key, I didn't covet them. That was why I didn't care about them. The old Taoist from Longhu Mountain wore a cold smile on his face. He didn't want to talk to me anymore. He waved his hand, and the scenery around us suddenly changed. All the furniture in the room disappeared, leaving only the two of us standing in an empty wasteland. It was just like when the heavenly fan was given to me by the patriarch. I thought that the old Taoist had brought me to an illusory world. However, after releasing my spiritual sense to check, I found that this place was real and not an illusory world. The old Taoist waved his hand casually and used a technique that could shrink the ground into inches, bringing me far away to another place. This skill was comparable to the heaven-measuring ruler. Longhu Mountain was worthy of being an orthodox Taoist sect that had existed for several thousand years. It was extraordinary that they could casually use such an immortal skill. The old Taoist didn't give me much time to sigh. He stood in front of me and gave me his last warning. "Kid, I advise you to give us the key. You should know that treasuring a jade ring will cause you to get into trouble." I smiled at him. "You're wrong. I don't understand that." After hearing my words, the old Taoist's face flashed with anger. He didn't waste time talking. He waved his hand and shouted, "Go!" As he moved, a talisman wrapped in the chi of the Wei rushed out of his mouth and directly into the sky. Longhu Mountain's main cultivation was talisman magic, so they used talismans most of the time when they fought. The old Taoist in front of me had the Yang spirit realm, so he didn't need to use cinnabar or yellow paper to make talismans. During the battle, the talismans automatically generated in the veins of the heavens and shot out. Since he used the power of the Yang spirit, the power of this talisman had reached the level of a golden talisman. In the blink of an eye, the sky above my head darkened. Then, thunderclouds rolled, and the power of thunder and lightning gathered. This scene was somewhat familiar. Back then, under Longhu Mountain, the temple master of the Black Altar, Chen Yangting, had also used the Heavenly Thunder Talisman. However, at that time we only had the Shuryao cultivation base, and the power of the Heavenly Thunder Talisman was much weaker than it was today. The Heavenly Thunder Talisman in front of me couldn't be compared to back then. In terms of power, it was thousands of times stronger than before. I wasn't completely confident that I could withstand it alone. While I was thinking, the first lightning bolt came from the rolling dark clouds and struck towards me. The heavenly thunder of Longhu Mountain never gave people the chance to dodge. So, I filled the armor remover sword with Taoist energy and stood at my original position. I held the armor remover sword and struck the lightning bolt. Fortunately, it was only the first lightning bolt, so its power wasn't too strong. After colliding with the armor remover sword energy, they cancelled each other out. When the first lightning bolt dissipated, the armor remover sword was once again filled with Taoist energy. The old Taoist obviously didn't want to give me time to catch my breath. Soon, the second lightning bolt struck. I raised my sword again. This time, the armor remover sword and the lightning bolt were in a stalemate for a few seconds before dissipating. Although I was still able to withstand it, I felt the armor remover sword tremble during the process. The power of each lightning bolt was several times stronger than the previous one. I didn't know if the armor remover sword could withstand the third lightning bolt. This was an important matter, so I didn't dare to test it out. I had no choice but to play it safe. I put the armor remover sword away and took out the Xian Yuan sword from my mouth. When the old Taoist saw that I was holding the Xian Yuan sword, he was shocked. Then, he became overjoyed. It seemed that he recognized the Xian Yuan sword. His eyes were filled with greed. He clicked his tongue and said, "With your strength, you don't deserve the Xian Yuan sword. I'll give you another chance. If you hand over the key and the Xian Yuan sword, I won't take your life." I ignored his chatter and focused on pouring Taoist energy into the Xian Yuan sword, preparing to receive the third lightning bolt. After a while, the dark clouds rolled even more violently and slowly approached me. The feeling of suppression was becoming more and more obvious. In the blink of an eye, the third lightning bolt came from the dark clouds and struck towards me. I knew that the power of the third lightning bolt would be ferocious, so I didn't dare to be careless. Almost at the same time that the lightning bolt struck, the Xian Yuan sword energy left the dark clouds and rushed towards it. This time, the sound of the collision was even louder. Waves of air blew the surrounding soil up. Fortunately, when the rumbling sound dissipated, the lightning bolt also disappeared. Seeing this, I heaved a sigh of relief and turned around to face the old Taoist. Chapter 8:19. Thunder magic had always been known for its speed. As soon as I had doubts in my mind, lightning surged out from the thunderclouds above my head. In just a moment, the fourth heavenly thunder descended from the sky. I was alarmed, and I didn't dare to hold back. I stepped on the heavenly dipper, and the Taoist and Magus Qi in my heavenly veins poured into the Xian Yuan sword. A few seconds later, the heavenly dipper stepped on the ground and swung the Xian Yuan sword up. The fourth heavenly thunder also fell at the same time. The Jingyi thunder magic was getting stronger and stronger, and the power of the fourth heavenly thunder was far greater than the previous three combined. Although I had used all my means at this time, and the power of the Xian Yuan sword Qi was not inferior to this heavenly thunder, after the collision, the result was not satisfactory. At the moment of the collision, the lightning broke through the Xian Yuan sword's energy and covered the entire sword. It quickly spread to my arm and exploded. At this time, I had poured all my cultivation into the Xian Yuan sword, and I had no defensive power. Under the power of the lightning explosion, my body flew backward and rolled on the ground for several meters. It was extremely embarrassing. Fortunately, when the lightning exploded, it was already an arrow at the end of its flight. Its power had just broken through my body's defense, and it didn't cause too much damage. After withstanding the fourth heavenly thunder, my first reaction wasn't to stand up, but to look up at the sky. At this time, the black cloud above my head hadn't dispersed, and it had condensed into a small ball with a diameter of less than 1 meter. It hung there, so deep that it seemed to be able to swallow all eyes. With the previous experience of the fourth heavenly thunder, how could I not see that the smaller the thundercloud was, the more powerful the heavenly thunder would be? I really didn't know what realm this old Taoist's cultivation had reached. He could actually summon the fifth heavenly thunder. With such a powerful thunder magic, it was no wonder that the people of Dragon Tiger Mountain never talked reason with others. They did have the capital to be unreasonable. While I was thinking, the low-hanging thundercloud shone brightly, and the fifth heavenly thunder was about to fall. At this time, the Taoist and Magus Qi in my body was exhausted, and it was difficult for me to control the Xianyuan sword. I had no choice but to close my eyes and urge the Yang spirit. As soon as the Yang spirit appeared, I immediately activated the Yang spirit technique, causing my hands to burn with crimson flames. I raised them to face the descending heavenly thunder. Tai Sui Yang God's hands quickly caught the falling heavenly thunder, but strangely, after the two touched, there was no sound, and the heavenly thunder did not disappear either. Instead, it formed a ball of lightning that hovered above the flames. I could clearly feel that the black light contained a huge amount of energy. If I hadn't used my Yang spirit, I wouldn't have been able to resist it. Seeing that the Yang spirit and the heavenly thunder were in a stalemate, I recalled the scene when the fatty had swallowed the divine punishment. I obtained the heaven-devouring art from the second volume of the Death Scripture. Because I had only cultivated the first layer, I didn't dare to use it against my enemies. I only used it once when I was dealing with Old Man Yuan, who had lost his intelligence. I have no other way to deal with this heavenly lightning, so I might as well try the heaven-devouring art. With a thought, I circulated the sky-swallowing secret art and opened my mouth in an attempt to swallow the lightning. Unexpectedly, when I opened my mouth, Tai Sui Yang God did the same. It opened its mouth and swallowed the heavenly lightning before I did. This surprised me, but before I had time to be surprised, my body suddenly trembled as if I had been electrocuted. Then, a pain as if thousands of ants were biting my heart spread throughout my body. However, the strange thing was that the pain disappeared as quickly as it came. Before I could even scream, the pain disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Even though it was only for a moment, it made my heart palpitate. I quickly turned my head and found that Tai Sui Yang God's body was on fire for some reason. Its whole body was wrapped in flames and floating in the air, motionless for a long time. I didn't know what had happened just now, but now I gradually came to my senses. The pain earlier was obviously the backlash of the heaven-devouring art swallowing the heavenly thunder, and Tai Sui Yang was refining the heavenly thunder. The root cause was that with my strength, I couldn't refine the heavenly thunder at all. Although the heaven-devouring art could swallow everything, if it swallowed a power that was beyond its own power, it would be severely injured before it could be swallowed. When I swallowed the Tai Sui Yang God in Thailand, it didn't resist. In fact, I couldn't even swallow the heavenly thunder in front of me, let alone the Tai Sui Yang God. Fortunately, Tai Sui Yang God swallowed the heavenly thunder. If I had swallowed it, I would still be suffering from the pain of thousands of ants biting my heart. While thinking about this, I didn't dare to stop moving. I stood up and looked at the heavenly master of Mount Longhu cautiously. When the fifth heavenly thunder disappeared, the thunderclouds hovering above my head disappeared, and the suffocating feeling disappeared. However, with the old Taoist's cultivation base, he must have other tricks he hadn't used yet. However, to my surprise, the old Taoist from Mount Longhu didn't move. He frowned as if he was thinking about something difficult. Before I could figure it out, he snorted and leaped into the sky, disappearing in just a blink of an eye. At this moment, besides the yang god and the snake spirit in my body, my power was like a lamp without oil. Of course, I didn't want to chase after him. After a while, I was worried about Zhang Canwen's injury. I didn't linger and absorbed the true dragon chi from the jade bracelet. Then, I leaped into the sky and headed back to the metaphysics shop. It was evening when I returned to the shop. Xie and Lu were cleaning up the mess in the shop. When they saw me, they looked happy. However, they immediately looked guilty. Their expressions showed that they knew what had happened today. With their cultivation base, staying in the shop wouldn't help them. I didn't mind and just asked them where they had gone. They answered, "I went out to deal with some trivial matters. I didn't expect that something bad would happen in the shop." As they explained, their faces were filled with apologetic expressions. It was obvious that they felt guilty and uneasy. Feeling helpless, I had to comfort them again. Then, I went to check on Zhang Canwen. When I got to the second floor, I found that the room had been cleaned. Tong Tong was sitting on the sofa. When she saw me, she immediately came to check on me. After confirming that I was okay, she told me that Zhang Canwen was fine and was resting in the room. I used my spiritual sense to check and found that Zhang Canwen's aura had recovered a lot. I guessed that Tong Tong had taken good care of him. Also, his breathing was steady, so I didn't disturb him. I casually sat next to Tong Tong. As soon as I sat down, a figure appeared in front of me. It was Lu Ruxu. After he appeared, he didn't say anything. Instead, he directly knelt in front of me, which made me confused. After asking, he said to me with a pleading tone, "Master, please save my lowly wife." His words surprised me. Then, I realized that he was talking about Wuyue. Did something happen to Wuyue? I frowned and hurried to ask. Lu Ruxu then told me about Wuyue's situation with a distressed face. His voice was urgent. Today, he was comprehending the death scripture when he suddenly sensed Wuyue's call. When he came back to his senses and went to check, he found that Wuyue's soul was almost gone. Then, he came out to ask me for help. After listening to him, I became worried. I immediately took out the Xianyuan sword and pulled Wuyue's soul out. As expected, Wuyue's soul didn't condense with the Xianyuan sword. On the contrary, it was fainter than it had been in Chiyo's tomb. It felt like it was about to disappear. No wonder Lu Ruxu was so worried. Wuyue's soul was just a thin line away from disappearing. However, I didn't understand. I had placed Wuyue's soul in the Xianyuan sword because I wanted to use the sword's power to help her recover. Who knew that it would end up like this? At this moment, Wuyue's soul didn't react. When Lu Ruxu pounced on her and carefully shouted in her ear several times, she moved. However, she still couldn't speak and just stared at Lu Ruxu. This scene reminded me of the scene in Chiyo's tomb. I still remembered Wuyue's words. Wuyue couldn't accompany my husband for a lifetime, but I will think of him for a lifetime. If a remnant soul like Wuyue has a next life, she will marry him like an ordinary couple. I was indebted to her, and with the relationship between her and Lu Ruxu, I couldn't help but think of me and Tao Wu. Thus, I didn't think much and saved her. Who knew that it would end up like this? I was puzzled and wanted to ask, but looking at Wuyue's current state, it was obvious that she couldn't speak. After thinking for a while, I thought of Senior Dismantled Armor. He had also placed his soul in the dismantled armor sword, so he should have some understanding of this matter. Thinking about this, I took out the dismantled armor sword and called for Senior Dismantled Armor. Fortunately, he had woken up and quickly responded to me. After hurriedly telling me about Wuyue's situation, Dismantled Armor Sword thought for a while and told me that Wuyue only had a remnant soul left and could die at any time. Fortunately, after several months of nourishment from the Xianyuan sword, her injuries had slowly recovered. However, recently I had used the Xianyuan sword too frequently. In addition, the heavenly lightning had just entered my body. Lightning techniques were the most effective against ghosts, so it affected Wuyue's soul. After listening to him, I suddenly understood. It turned out that Wuyue's current state was caused by me. After understanding this, I couldn't help but feel guilty. I quickly asked Dismantled Armor Sword if there was a solution. Chapter 820. How could it be? After hearing that, I was stunned on the spot. After a long while, I came back to my senses. I turned around and looked at Lu Ruxu and Wuyue, who were hugging each other. I felt really guilty. I wanted to see them get married, but I didn't expect that my actions would harm Wuyue. After pondering for a while, I pulled myself together. Although Wuyue's situation wasn't good, as long as he had pure Yin energy to nourish him, he would be fine for the time being. I didn't dare to linger. I hurried to stop Lu Ruxu and carefully told her about Wuyue's condition. After listening to me, Lu Ruxu didn't blame me. She just wanted to use her Yin energy to nourish Wuyue's soul. I hurried to stop her. Wuyue needs pure Yin energy to nourish him. In this aspect, Tong is much better than Lu Ruxu. Of course, Lu Ruxu knew this. She was too concerned about Wuyue. When I called her, she pulled herself together and begged Tong. Tong was ready. Without waiting for him to say anything, she separated half of her Yin energy to wrap Wuyue's remnant soul. Wuyue's soul was weak. He couldn't bear a large amount of Yin energy. Moreover, I can't wrap his soul directly. Under his command, Tong gathered her Yin energy into thin threads that wound around Wuyue's body. In the end, Wuyue's body was like a silkworm cocoon. After Tong was done, I closed my eyes to sense. I felt that Wuyue's soul was much more stable than before. I relaxed a little bit. Using Yin energy to nourish Wuyue's remnant soul was just a temporary measure. If we wanted to solve this problem, we needed to find a reliable solution. I pondered for a while. Lu Ruxu was a Taoist of Mount Longhu. He had grown up in Mount Longhu. He had read a lot of books since he was a child. Perhaps he knew some unorthodox method. After I asked him, he looked pensive. After a long moment, he frowned and said, "I seem to have seen some records, but it's been a long time. I can't remember them clearly. I'll go back to Mount Longhu's library to check. Perhaps I can find a solution." As soon as he said that, I shook my head. Although he was a Taoist of Mount Longhu, he had betrayed his sect for Wuyue. When the Taoists of Mount Longhu saw Lu Ruxu in Chio's tomb, their first reaction was to kill him. If he went back, he wouldn't be able to come back. Originally, saving Wuyue was to let them reunite. If Wuyue survived, but his soul was destroyed, then what was the point of everything? Moreover, even if his soul perished, he wouldn't be able to find a way to save Wuyue. If we really need to go to Mount Longhu to find a solution, then I should be the one going. After all, Wuyue's current situation is because of me. Lu Ruxu. He wanted to say something, but I waved my hand to stop him. He had a doubtful look on his face, as if he didn't understand why I was doing this. I told him my thoughts and hinted that if he had to go to Mount Longhu, it would be safer for me to go. After listening to me, he said, "No, I can't. Outsiders can't enter the library of Mount Longhu. Only with the Elder's token can they move freely. I have always had enmity with Mount Longhu. To me, that place is like a land of tigers and wolves. When the time comes, a battle is unavoidable." Dragon Tiger Mountain was an orthodox Taoist sect with thousands of years of heritage. There were several people who had reached the Yang spirit realm, and there were dozens of Yang spirit celestial masters. Furthermore, Mount Longhu has a protective formation. If I were to force my way in, these methods would be enough to deal with me. At that time, he might not even be able to keep his life, let alone obtain the Elder's token. I knew he wasn't trying to scare me. Previously, I had been able to escape from the hands of the Taoist priests of Mount Longhu with the help of others. Now that the sacrificial evil spirit was not around, the pupil and the snake spirit were of little use. It was unrealistic to force their way into Mount Longhu. Thinking of that, I also dispelled that idea. However, Lu Ruxu and I couldn't go to Mount Longhu. This was a bit troublesome and I couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed. Right at this moment, the voice transmission talisman sounded. I released my spiritual power to check. It was a message from the fatty. He told me that his injuries had completely healed. Dao Master Guan had asked him to go down the mountain to gain experience. He asked me where I was. The fatty's news made me snap out of my gloomy mood. I told him that I had returned to Shenzhen and was now in the Feng Shui Xian shop. I didn't have a clue about the current situation, so I didn't want to dwell on it. If there was a way to solve Wu Yue's problem, I would try my best. For a moment, the atmosphere in the shop quieted down. Lu Ruxu wore a gloomy face. She seemed to be thinking about something. After apologizing to me, she went to accompany Wu Yue. When the fatty arrived at the shop, it was already late at night. I saw that he was full of energy and his cultivation base had improved. I was really happy for him. As soon as he saw me, he pulled me aside and asked me to tell him about my recent adventures. I didn't need to hide anything from him, so I started from the time I left Mount Huangguan. However, halfway through the story, I found that Lu Ruxu's aura had disappeared. My heart sank. Did something happen to him? With this in mind, I broke off my conversation with the fatty and hurried into the room. There was only the silkworm cocoon with Wu Yue's remnant soul in the room. Lu Ruxu's figure was nowhere to be seen. However, there was a small line of words carved on the wall. It was left by Lu Ruxu. It said that he had pondered for a long time and had decided to go to Mount Longhu to explore. If he didn't return, he begged me to keep it a secret from Wu Yue. After reading this, my heart was filled with complicated feelings that I couldn't describe. I knew that Lu Ruxu was a prudent person, and that he had made this decision after careful consideration. I just hoped that he could return safely. The fatty saw all of this, and he seemed to notice that my face was a little heavy. Although he was curious, he didn't ask me about it. Instead, I looked at him and took the initiative to tell him about it. I also asked him if he could perform a divination for Lu Ruxu so that I could be more prepared. After listening to me, the fatty immediately agreed. He sat cross-legged on the sand and closed his eyes. After a while, he slowly opened his eyes and told me that the divination was a good sign. His words made me heave a sigh of relief. It seemed that Lu Ruxu could find a way to solve Wu Yue's problem this time. Fortunately, I didn't have anything urgent to do. After he came back, I could deal with it. Since I knew the result, I didn't want to dwell on it anymore. I chatted with the fatty. We chatted for the whole night. The next morning, Lu Ruxu flew back. His soul was a little weak. I guessed he had been hurt. Seeing him like that, I hurried to ask, "What happened?" He waved his hand and didn't want to talk about it. He found a solution in the library of Mount Longhu. I knew this from the fatty's divination, but I still wanted to ask him what he had found. He paused and told me everything he had read in the book. From him, I learned that after he had rushed to Mount Longhu, he had sneaked into the library and searched for a whole night. Finally, he had found an ancient book. It recorded something that made him feel that it could solve Wu Yue's problem. According to the book, thousands of years ago, an almighty Taoist master had used the Shenong cauldron to regenerate his flesh and bones after his death. He had lived in the human world for another 100 years. I was surprised. The Shenong cauldron was one of the 10 great divine tools, also known as the World Creation Cauldron. It was an ancient cauldron that Shenong had used to refine hundreds of medicines in ancient times. Because it had accumulated the qi of countless spiritual medicines for thousands of years, it was said that it could refine peerless divine medicines that even the gods in heaven couldn't obtain. Not only that, but there were other mysterious powers hidden within. The expert recorded in the book had relied on the Shenong cauldron to reconstruct his body. In that case, Wu Yue's situation was worth a try. However, I didn't know where the Shenong cauldron was. I immediately asked Lu Ruxu if there was any record of the Shenong cauldron's whereabouts in the book. He shook his head and told me, There's no specific record in the book. It only mentioned that the Shunnong cauldron recently appeared in the Medicine King Valley. As soon as he finished talking, the fatty answered. He looked pensive and mumbled, "The Medicine King Valley?" Seeing him like that, I was a little suspicious. Could it be that the fatty knew something? Then I asked him about it. After listening to me, the fatty didn't immediately respond. After a while, he said, "Didn't you ask me to pay attention to Marshal Uncle Nangong's movements? A few days ago, I saw him at Mount Huang Guanshan, but he was discussing something with my master, so I didn't go and disturb him. I only vaguely heard them mention the Medicine King Valley. Now that I heard this name again, I feel that it's a little strange." The fatty's words raised a cloud of suspicion in my heart. Ever since the incident with Grandpa Yuan, I noticed that everything that Nangong had done over the years was more or less related to me. The fatty said that he had accidentally heard Nangong and spiritual master Guan talking about the Medicine King Valley. Our current target was also the Medicine King Valley. In my opinion, this didn't seem to be a coincidence. Nangong must have taken action in the Medicine King Valley, and this matter must be related to me. In that case, I was somewhat convinced that the Shunnong cauldron was in the Medicine King Valley. Thinking about this, I didn't delay any further and signaled everyone to leave for the Medicine King Valley. Of course, Lu Ruxu didn't object, but Wu Yue had to be taken away. After thinking about it again and again, I signaled him to carry her back into the Xiang Lu pouch and keep an eye on her situation. After Lu Ruxu and Wu Yue entered the Xiang Lu pouch, I went to check on Zhang Canwen's situation. Fortunately, he was talented and had the cultivation of a heavenly master, so his injuries had recovered by 40 to 50%. I didn't disturb him and just told him that I was going on a long trip, so I asked him to take care of the store. Chapter 8:21. On Mount Longhu, Lu Ruxu had already ascertained the location of the Valley of the Medicine Masters. It was not some hidden place, but on Mount Yaowang, which bordered Jiangyu and the Chang tribes of the northern Chuan of Shu. As for the specific location, Lu Ruxu didn't know and I didn't care. As long as they arrived at the Herb King Mountain, they would be able to find it after a thorough search. Since we didn't have much time, the fatty and I drove straight to the airport after we left the shop. We flew to Mianyang. When we got out of the Nanjiao airport, it was around noon. We were in a hurry, so we didn't linger. We took a taxi to Beichuan County. When we arrived, we found another car and went straight to Mount Yaowang. Most of the people in Sichuan were talkative. When the driver heard our foreign accent, he thought that we were going to Yaowang Mountain for sightseeing. He enthusiastically told us about the Yaowang Mountain. According to him, the Yaowang Mountain was rich in medicinal herbs, and some of them were quite famous. Not only that, but the origin of the Yaowang Mountain was also quite special. It was said that Qi Bo, the ancestor of medicine, used to gather herbs in this mountain. The medicine king Sun Simiao and his disciple Lu Xinwei dug up the flesh lingji and used it to cure many of the local diseases. This Ganoderma lucidum was also regarded as the king of medicine by the local people, which was how the Yaowang Mountain got its name. What he said was normal. Basically, every scenic spot would have some far-fetched stories about famous people to show off their history. I wasn't interested, so I asked him if he knew where the Medicine King Valley was. After all, this talkative driver was a local. If he could directly ask for the location of Medicine King Valley, it would save him a lot of trouble. But disappointingly, the driver thought for a long time and said that he had never heard of the name Medicine King Valley. Since I didn't get the answer I wanted, I wasn't in the mood to continue the conversation. I leaned against the chair, closed my eyes, and released my spirit sense to check Wu Yue's situation. Removing the armor was obviously not wrong. Under the nourishment of the yin qi in his eyes, although Wu Yu's soul was weak, it had indeed stopped dissipating. At least for 3 to 5 days, nothing would happen. Only then did I relax. After driving for 2 hours, they finally arrived at Yaowang Mountain. At this time, it was the peak tourist season, and there was an endless stream of tourists coming to enjoy the scenery. When I got down from the entrance of the Yaowang Mountain scenic area, I lifted my head and looked in front of me. This Yaowang Mountain wasn't a lone peak. It was a continuous mountain range that I couldn't see the end of. Looking at the vast mountains in front of me, I felt a headache coming on. If the Medicine King Mountain area was not big, with my current cultivation, my spiritual sense could cover the whole area, and I could easily find the location of the Medicine King Valley. However, the mountain range was long, and it would take some time to search blindly. Fortunately, he had the experience of going to the Green Hill Country last time, so he didn't have to wander around like a headless fly in the mountains. I pondered for a moment and came up with a plan. Like the Qingqiu country, the Medicine King Valley is definitely not in the scenic area. As long as we bypass the scenic area, the search area can be reduced a lot. In this way, the time spent can be saved by more than half. With that in mind, I took the fatty away from the scenic area and followed a small path up the mountain. After walking for about an hour, they could no longer see the noisy scene from before. Then, we started to search from the edge of the mountain, just like plowing a field. When I was searching for the Green Hill Country, I basically used the same method. However, at that time, I had only searched for a short while when someone appeared and let us in. This time, we weren't so lucky. Soon, the afternoon had passed, and we didn't see anyone. The fatty was an impatient man. Seeing that it was getting late and we hadn't made any progress, he asked Lu Ruxu if she had found the wrong place. Lu Ruxu wouldn't make a mistake in such an important matter. I didn't pay attention to him and continued to move forward. However, at this moment, I suddenly felt an aura quickly approaching us. Sensing this situation, my heart was instantly filled with joy. If a cultivator appeared in this barren mountain, it meant that the people of the Medicine King Valley had appeared. It seemed our search would come to an end soon. However, as soon as this information appeared, I furrowed my brows. Just now, I had only felt the aura of a cultivator, but now, I recognized that the aura coming from afar was the fluctuation of shamanic energy. This made me suspicious. How could it be the aura of shamanic energy? Among the people I knew who cultivated shamanic energy, there were only Nangong, the evil sacrificial spirit, Wang Can, and the fatty's father. Could it be that one of them had come here? While I was thinking, the aura of that person had approached us. I lifted my head and saw a woman in a white robe in the distance. This time I was dumbfounded. Among the people I knew who cultivated shamanic energy, there was no woman. It was obvious that she was a person who cultivated shamanic energy that I didn't know. Because of myself, I always had a good impression of people who cultivated shamanic energy. At this moment, I was more happy than shocked. I smiled and waited for the woman to come closer. However, when she finally came closer and I saw her face, I couldn't maintain my smile anymore. Instead, I was dumbfounded. The woman in front of me was Bai Ling, who had disappeared in the fire god temple many years ago. How could it be her? That year, before she disappeared in the fire god temple, she had been searching for something next to the huge throne. Then, she had thrown out an item that looked like a jade bracelet. At that time, I knew that she wasn't an ordinary person. However, after thinking for a long time, I couldn't find any reason. I went to the fire god temple to look for her many times, but I couldn't find any trace of her. Many years had passed and I had forgotten about her. I didn't expect her to appear here again. How did she come out of the fire god temple? Why does she have a body of shamanic energy? Back then, what was her goal in the fire god temple? After the shock, a series of questions popped up in my head. I opened my eyes wide and stared at her. I couldn't speak for quite a while. I saw Bai Ling, and naturally, the fatty next to me saw her too. While I was shocked, the fat on his face was shivering. He was obviously extremely excited. Back then, the fatty and Bai Ling were a pair of quarrelsome lovers. They quarreled with each other and were very intimate. I had once thought that the two of them would get together. Who would have thought that so many things would happen after that? However, after so many years, I hadn't heard of any progress in the fatty's relationship. Now that he was so excited, it was obvious that he was still thinking about Bai Ling. He could be considered an affectionate person. The fatty's emotions calmed down faster than mine. He walked to Bai Ling's side and seemed to want to smile. However, he only pulled an expression that was uglier than crying. His throat trembled for a long while. When he spoke, he wasn't as relaxed as when he was playing with Bai Ling back then. Instead, he spoke with difficulty. After I came out, I went back to look for you many times. I thought have you been well all these years? The fatty's words were messy. It was obvious that his emotions weren't stable. However, when Bai Ling heard what he said, her expression didn't change. She didn't even look at the fatty. After keeping silent for a while, she nodded and replied, The fatty wanted to say something, but when he opened his mouth, he couldn't make a sound. He could only look at her passionately. His gaze was overflowing with affection. Bai Ling still didn't pay attention to him. Instead, she turned to look at me and frowned. Why are you here? Back then, we had experienced life and death together. Her indifferent attitude towards the fatty had already made me feel strange. Now, her words that came out of nowhere made me even more puzzled. Thus, I asked her, What do you mean? Bai Ling put away the puzzled expression on her face and cupped her hands at me. The two of you are heading to Medicine King Valley, right? I've been ordered to pick you up. Please follow me. Then, she didn't say anything else. She turned and walked away. The fatty and I exchanged glances and quickly followed her. Although we were puzzled, Bai Ling didn't want to say anything and we couldn't interrogate her. We could only follow her and decide what to do next. On the way, I pondered. Since Bai Ling had appeared here, it was obviously related to Medicine King Valley. I didn't find it strange. What was strange was that from what she had said, it was obvious that someone had asked her to pick us up. Who could it be? Considering Bai Ling's witchcraft energy and what the fatty had said about Nangong's relationship with Medicine King Valley, I guessed that Nangong had something to do with this. Could it be that the person Bai Ling had mentioned was Nangong? I wanted to ask Bai Ling, but seeing her cold attitude, I guessed she didn't want to talk about it. So I didn't ask. When we arrived at Medicine King Valley, everything would be clear. Bai Ling continued forward and soon arrived at a kernel. Only then did Bai Ling stop in her tracks. I looked around. There were cliffs on both sides, and there were no houses or farms in between. It didn't look like we were in Medicine King Valley. However, Bai Ling turned around and told me, Use your witchcraft energy to cover your body. Only then can we enter Medicine King Valley. As soon as he said that, I immediately understood that there should be a restrictive spell here. I didn't doubt him and immediately circulated my witchcraft energy to cover my body. However, although the fatty was a descendant of the 9 cauldrons, he cultivated Tao energy. He couldn't enter by himself. Thereupon, I released my witchcraft aura and enveloped his body. Seeing that we were ready, Bai Ling didn't say anything. She directly jumped into the mountain stream on the left. With my current cultivation base, I knew that the mountain stream on the left was where the Medicine King Valley's restriction formation was. I didn't hesitate. I wrapped the fatty around me and followed behind Bai Ling. After jumping, our bodies fell for a while. Soon, a white mist floated in front of us. When the white mist dispersed, we found that we had landed on soft ground. The scenery in front of us had changed completely. We were surrounded by farmlands that had been fenced into herb gardens of the same size. In each herb garden there was a single herb. Between the herb gardens there were crisscrossed paths. I could see some people on the paths and in the herb gardens. I sniffed, and my nose was filled with the fragrance of herbs. Needless to say, this was Medicine King Valley. While I was still looking around, Bai Ling urged me from the exit in front of me. When I turned around, she had already started to walk forward. I hurried to catch up with her. After walking for a while, we arrived at the foot of a small mountain. There were a few thatched cottages, and in front of the cottages was a big cauldron. My eyes were immediately attracted by the big cauldron. The cauldron didn't fall to the ground but floated in the air. It had a square abdomen, 4 legs, and a green body. The body of the cauldron was covered with strange patterns. At first glance, I knew it wasn't an ordinary cauldron. I had been with the Xianyuan sword for a long time, so I could easily sense the power of a divine weapon from the cauldron. Thus, I quickly determined that this cauldron was the Shenong cauldron. Chapter 8:22. Hearing this voice, I turned around. Who else could it be but Nangong? I had already expected it, so I wasn't surprised to see Nangong. I hurried to greet him with the fatty. After greeting him, the fatty was still immersed in his entanglement with Bai Ling and didn't say anything. I asked Nangong, "How did you know I was coming here?" I had long been used to the fact that Nangong knew everything about me. It was just a casual question, but I didn't expect Nangong to shake his head and tell me that he didn't know I was coming here. After sensing my aura, he asked Bai Ling to go out and pick me up. Hearing that, I couldn't help but be surprised. At this time, Nangong smiled and said, "This Medicine King Valley is the refuge of my witch tribe. When I'm not with you, I stay here. Originally, I planned to take you here, but I didn't expect that you would come here yourself. Tell me, how did you find this place, and why did you come here?" I wanted to ask about Bai Ling, but after hearing Nangong's question, I had to suppress my doubts and tell him the reason for my trip in detail. After listening to me, Nangong nodded and said, "Although I wasn't with you at that time, I know the whole story. She was kind to you, so it's natural to save her remnant soul. You don't need to be impatient. That cauldron is the Shenong cauldron. You can use it." With his consent, I was relieved. I hurried to take out Wuyue's remnant soul from the Shangliu bag and handed it to Nangong. Nangong went over and activated the Shenong cauldron, placing Wuyue's remnant soul in it. Then, he told me that the Shenong cauldron's nourishing and reconstructing effect was unparalleled, but Wuyue was a lonely soul without anything to rely on. It was impossible to reconstruct a body for the time being. I had to nourish the remnant soul first and make it stronger. With Wuyue's current remnant soul, if he wanted to reconstruct a body, it was almost the same as creating a new life. Of course, I knew the difficulty. I didn't expect to use the Shenong cauldron to do it, so I was prepared and nodded. After settling the matter with Wuyue, Nangong looked at me with gratification in his eyes. "I haven't seen you for a while. Not bad. You've finally advanced to the Yang God realm." I nodded but didn't answer. I had an indescribable feeling in my heart. All along, Nangong's movements and whereabouts have always been extremely secretive. However, to me, he has always played the role of a father and brother. Many times, even his gaze when he looks at me carries a kind of intense expectation, as though he is anxiously waiting for me to grow up. I vaguely understood the reason, but could not articulate it. At that moment, Nangong changed the topic. He pointed at his surroundings and said, "The remaining members of the sorcerer tribe are basically all in this valley. Since you're here, let's go out for a walk. The people here have been waiting for you for a long time." "Wait for me?" I frowned as I didn't understand. At that moment Bai Ling, who was beside me, suddenly exclaimed. She looked at Nangong in astonishment and asked loudly, "Are you saying that he is the saint?" Saints? I was not unfamiliar with this title. Wang Can and Lin Aching had called me that, but they were members of the Nine Cauldrons clan. Why would Bai Ling say that? Could it be that she and Nangong were also members of the Nine Cauldrons clan? I recalled that Wang Can and Lin Aching both cultivated sorcery energy. Could it be that the Medicine King Valley was also one of the Nine Cauldrons clan? Or, the Nine Cauldrons clan was the sorcerer tribe? As soon as I thought of this, I shook my head. The Nine Cauldrons clan got their name from the Nine Cauldrons. However, the Medicine King Valley, or Nangong and Bai Ling, obviously had nothing to do with the Nine Cauldrons clan. I couldn't think of an answer. At that moment, Nangong nodded slightly at Bai Ling, confirming her words. After getting the confirmation, Bai Ling was even more shocked. She was stunned for a long time. Suddenly, she knelt in front of me and called me saint. I was already used to the etiquette of Wang Can and the people of Wangu Grotto Heaven. At that moment, I didn't feel any discomfort. However, Bai Ling was someone I had known for a long time. After hesitating for a while, I didn't know how to deal with her. I could only ignore her for the time being. I turned to Nangong and asked him about my doubts. Nangong didn't participate much in the Nine Cauldrons clan's matter. However, there were few things that he didn't know about me. After hearing my question, he smiled and told me that the Nine Cauldrons clan cultivated witchcraft energy. Naturally, they were also members of the sorcerer tribe. However, they were considered as another inheritance of the sorcerer tribe, which was different from the Medicine King Valley. As for my identity as a saint, he smiled and explained that when Shino passed away, there was a prophecy that a saint would be born. I was the saint who was born. Hence, regardless of whether it was the Nine Cauldrons clan or the Medicine King Valley, they all recognized my identity as a saint. I still didn't understand what he had said. According to what he had told me previously, as well as my experiences in the past few years, I basically knew that I was the reincarnation of Monster King Jun and Emperor Ku. However, regardless of whether it was Monster King Jun or Emperor Ku, they had nothing to do with the sorcerer tribe. I could understand if it was said that I was a living saint of the monster tribe. However, it was unbelievable that I had become a saint of the sorcerer tribe. When I asked Nangong about it again, he shook his head and told me not to be anxious. I would find out later. Since he wasn't willing to say it now, I naturally didn't probe further. Just as I was about to follow him out, Bai Ling, who was at the side, asked me again, "Saint, do you know the whereabouts of the saintess?" His words made me confused again. I was familiar with the term saint, but what did the saintess mean? I was confused. I turned to look at Nangong, but he didn't speak. Instead, he was talking to the fat man at the side. Helpless, I could only ask Bai Ling who the so-called saintess was. Bai Ling seemed to be puzzled that I didn't know the identity of the saintess. He said that he had gone to the fire god temple to look for the saintess. Hearing what he said, I was shocked. Besides the silver-eyed man, there was only Tao Wu in the fire god temple. Could the saintess that he mentioned be Tao Wu? I had always been curious about Tao Wu's identity, but she didn't want to tell me. Who knew that I would get some unexpected news here? After I calmed down, I asked Bai Ling, "Is the saintess she mentioned Tao Wu?" Hearing the name Tao Wu, she was stunned. Then, she nodded. After getting confirmation, I was puzzled. Tao Wu was in the fire god temple. It was impossible that Nangong didn't know about it. Why did Bai Ling ask about Tao Wu's whereabouts? Did Nangong not tell her? I turned to look at Nangong, then lowered my head to look at Bai Ling. At that moment, I didn't know how to answer. After a moment of silence, I saw that Nangong didn't say anything, so I told Bai Ling that Tao Wu was in the fire god temple. I asked her, "Did you not see Tao Wu when you entered the fire god temple that year?" Hearing my answer, Bai Ling was stunned. She told me that after she entered, the fire god temple had disappeared and she had fallen into a coma. Afterwards, Nangong had saved her and she hadn't seen Bai An at all. Naturally, she didn't know that she was in the fire god temple. Then, she continued to tell me that Tao Wu was the saintess of the witch tribe. For thousands of years, the Medicine King Valley had been searching for the whereabouts of the saintess. Until a few years ago, she accidentally sensed the aura of the saintess. She wanted to find her and confirm the saintess's situation. From Nangong, she learned that the saintess was in the fire god temple. Then, she learned that Chief Lu had a map of the fire god temple. Coincidentally, he was also looking for the fire god temple. Thus, she participated in this matter as a secretary. However, she couldn't find the saintess's whereabouts at that time. However, she just wanted to confirm the saintess's situation. She didn't want to bring her back to the Medicine King Valley. Then, Bai Ling didn't say anything else. There was something in her words that interested me a lot. She mentioned that the Medicine King Valley had been searching for the saintess for thousands of years. In other words, Tao Wu had lived thousands of years ago. Moreover, the Medicine King Valley was a branch of the witch tribe. I couldn't help but connect Tao Wu to the antiquity time. Moreover, almost everything that has happened to me in the past few years is related to that period. Since Lao Ai was able to have such a marriage with me, she must have an extraordinary identity. Since she was a person from thousands of years ago and the saintess of the Medicine King Valley, could she be related to the Yen Emperor? However, this was just my guess. Perhaps the white-collared worker knew the truth. With that in mind, I asked Bai Ling about it. Since she had told me about the relationship between Tao Wu and the Medicine King Valley, she didn't need to hide anything from me. After listening to my words, she didn't hesitate and immediately told me. From her, I learned that Tao Wu was indeed a person from the antiquity time. Moreover, she was the Yen Emperor's youngest daughter. Hearing this, I was bewildered. That girl was the Yen Emperor's youngest daughter. According to ancient records, the girl drowned and turned into a Jingwei. According to the legends, the girl was attracted by the ultimate ruin. She jumped to the East Sea alone and swam toward it. However, along the way there was a storm that swallowed the girl. She sank into the ultimate ruin and never returned. However, even though the girl was dead, her spirit was still there. She hated the waves in the sea and turned a few strands of her spiritual energy into Jingwei birds, sending them to fill up the East Sea. This was how the legend of Jingwei filling the sea came about. After thousands of years of change, it was possible that the East Sea had shrunk. In that case, the Fire God Temple was the original ultimate ruin. Since our village was related to the Fire God Temple, it was reasonable for Tao Wu to appear in the village. Tao Wu had died in the ultimate ruin. Moreover, that place was mysterious. It was understandable that she couldn't leave. Now I understood why Bai Ling called Tao Wu the saintess. The witch tribe referred to the Yen Emperor's tribe, and the Medicine King Valley was one of them. The Yen Emperor was the chief of the tribe, so his daughter was naturally the saintess of the witch tribe. However, there were still many things that I didn't understand. I was the reincarnation of Monster King Jun and Emperor Ku. Emperor Ku was the great-grandson of the Yellow Emperor, so he had nothing to do with the Yen Emperor. However, in the war back then, Monster King Jun killed the Yen Emperor in order to snatch the power of witchcraft chi. That was also the reason why I could use witchcraft chi. I remembered that the reason why Tao Wu pestered me was because I drank a cup of wine at the grave and then bowed to her in my sleep. However, since Tao Wu was the daughter of the Yen Emperor, why would she marry her enemy? Could it be that she didn't know my identity at all? Or was it just because I accidentally drank that cup of strong wine? As I thought about it, I suddenly realized that I had embarked on the path of cultivation because of the death scripture that Tao Wu had given me. That was how the series of events that followed happened. In that case, it wasn't a coincidence. There must be a mastermind behind the scenes. From the looks of it, the meeting between Tao Wu and me was the beginning of the entire plan, and also the most crucial part. Previously, I had never thought about these things. Now that I knew about the situation, I was rather displeased. However, even if it was a plan, Tao Wu's feelings for me were very real. There were no distracting thoughts between us, and heaven and earth could prove that. As I thought about it, I had to thank the mastermind behind the scenes. If not for his plan, Tao Wu and I wouldn't have been fated to be married. As I thought about it, I no longer bothered about the mastermind behind the scenes. Chapter 8:23. The revelation of Bai An's identity made me fall into a daze. My mind was in a daze, and I didn't make a sound for a long time. Nangong knew that I was feeling restless, so he didn't say anything else. He stood there and waited for 15 minutes, giving me time to calm down. Then, he walked over and patted my shoulder. Everything has its own fate. You have a special identity, so there are some things that you can't avoid. You don't need to worry too much. Just treat it as your mission. Mission? Why me? Why am I destined to bear all of this? I shook my head at Nangong. Monster Emperor Jun, Emperor Ku, and the sages might be my mission, but Bai An isn't. Nangong was stunned. He sighed and nodded after a long while. Let's not talk about this. Your clansmen are waiting for you. Let's go and meet them. No matter if it was Nangong or Officer Wang, they had done many things for me. They had received benefits, so there was no reason for them to deny it. I sighed and nodded. Then, I followed Nangong and Bai Ling to the village. After a few minutes, we walked past the Shinong cauldron and reached the other side of the 7 or 8 houses. There were a dozen people standing in front of the houses. They were wearing coarse hemp clothes and were looking at us. As we approached, Bai Ling walked past me and jogged towards the group of people. He whispered something to them. When we arrived, the people of the shaman tribe knelt in front of me. Their eyes were filled with excitement as they shouted, "Greetings, sages!" From the appearance of the surrounding houses, it seemed that all the people of the Medicine King Valley were here. There were a dozen of them, old and young. No wonder Nangong had reacted that way when I had asked him how many of his clansmen were still alive. At that moment I could reluctantly accept such etiquette. After nodding to show my respect, I walked over and helped them up, indicating that they didn't need to be so formal in the future. As I helped them up and talked, every member of the shaman tribe, regardless of their age, had tears in their eyes. I had an indescribable feeling when I looked at them. Perhaps Nangong was right. This was the mission that I was born to bear. After the clansmen stood up, they made way for us. Nangong stayed behind as if he had something to discuss with the clansmen. Bai Ling led the way and brought us to rest. Behind the 7 or 8 thatched cottages, there was a house made of green bricks and tiled tiles. The plaque at the door had the words, 100 Herb Hall written on it in ancient script. After taking us in, Bai Ling asked us to rest on the wooden chairs in the room. Nangong will come later. We will discuss the Shinong cauldron. After saying this, she lifted her feet and prepared to leave. At this moment, Fatty, who had been silent all this time, suddenly called out to her. Bai Ling stopped and turned to look at Fatty without saying a word. Fatty took a deep breath and looked at Bai Ling with a burning gaze. Bai Ling, don't you have anything to say? Hearing the Fatty's words, Bai Ling's expression did not change at all. She replied indifferently, should I have anything to say? Bai Ling's words caused the sorrow on Fatty's face to become even more intense. After a moment of silence, he let out a bitter laugh. Looks like I'm looking for trouble. That's right, so many years have passed, people will change. If you were to fall in love with him, it would be a normal thing. Fatty had already thrown caution to the wind. However, Bai Ling's expression did not change. She shook her head and said, there's no such thing as falling in love with him. That year, I went to the fire god temple to look for the saintess. Meeting you was an accident. After I found out that you were from the 9 Cauldrons clan, I wanted to get close to you to see if I could find out the whereabouts of the saintess. When I came out of the fire god temple, Nangong told me about the saintess' arrival. I had no reason to get involved with you. That's all I have to say. You're on your own now. After saying that, she did not wait for Fatty's reply and left. After she left, Fatty fell completely silent. He sat to one side and stared blankly ahead, not saying a word. I wanted to comfort him, but I had never experienced such a thing before. I didn't know what to say, so I could only stay by his side in silence. Bai Ling had made her words very clear. However, as I thought about what she had said, I felt that something wasn't right. She said that after Nangong had saved her from the fire god temple, Nangong had already told her about the saintess. However, Bai Ling obviously didn't know about my identity as the saintess. Maybe it was because Nangong had only mentioned the saintess but not me. However, Nangong obviously didn't tell her the truth about Tao Wu. Back then, Nangong had saved my life and sent me to the fire god temple. He naturally knew about Tao Wu's whereabouts. However, Bai Ling had been searching for Tao Wu. She had even asked me where Tao Wu was. It was obvious that Nangong hadn't told her about it. This was very strange. They were all survivors of the witch tribe. There were only a dozen of them left in the entire witch tribe. Could there be a conflict between them? If it was someone else, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a conflict. However, Nangong was obviously not a person who fought for power. Why would he fight with a little girl like Bai Ling? Could it be that there was a secret behind all of this? The alarm clock pondered about all of this, but it was unable to obtain an answer for a long time. Meanwhile, the fatty suddenly muttered in pain, "I'm really asking for trouble. If I knew about this all those years ago, why would I have searched so bitterly for her all these years? I couldn't bear to see him like this." I walked over and tried to comfort him. However, the fat man didn't listen to me. He just shook his head and didn't say anything. I knew that comforting him at this moment wouldn't work. I had to leave him alone and let him think it through. That was how I could be open-minded. I patted his shoulder and didn't say anything else. Then, I left the room. When I got out of the room, I wanted to walk around. Unexpectedly, as soon as I got out of the door, I saw Nangong walking toward me. He must have finished dealing with his tribe's business. I didn't want to disturb the fat man, so I hurried to greet him. As I was about to talk to him, I saw that he was holding a jade bracelet in his hand. It was exactly the same as the one I was wearing on my chest. I subconsciously extended my hand in front of my chest and found that my jade bracelet was hanging on my chest. I exhaled and asked Nangong, "Where did you get that jade bracelet from?" Nangong smiled mysteriously. "I've seen this jade bracelet before." Hearing him say that, a thought flashed through my mind. I instantly reacted. The jade bracelet in his hand was definitely the one that Bai Ling had searched for in the fire god temple back then, and had tried to throw it out. That year, it had happened too suddenly. Until today, I didn't dare to confirm that I had seen it clearly. Now that I had seen the real thing, I was sure that I hadn't seen it wrongly. Now that I thought about it, it wasn't strange at all. That year outside the fire god temple, Nangong must have been there. After Bai Ling had found the jade bracelet in the fire god temple, she had thrown it out. She didn't want to give it to me, but to Nangong. However, I didn't know that Nangong was there. That was why there was a misunderstanding. After understanding the situation, I didn't understand what the jade bracelet was. What was the connection between the jade bracelet in Nangong's hand and the one that Bayan had given me? Just as I was about to ask, Nangong waved his hand and interrupted me. "Follow me." Then, he left the courtyard. I hastily followed him. On the way, he told me all the questions that had been bothering me. According to him, there was a pair of jade bracelets. Shenong and Xianyuan each had one. The one that Bayan had given me was the one that Shenong had. The other one had been passed down by Xianyuan and had ended up in the fire god temple. As for what the jade bracelets were, I continued to ask. Nangong stopped and turned to look at me. With a solemn expression, he said, "It's time for you to know about this." Then, he waved his hand and set up a barrier around us. It was obvious that the jade bracelets were very important. After that, Nangong started to tell me. According to him, there was a mysterious world sealed in the two jade bracelets. This world was the so-called immortal world that the people of the metaphysics world had mentioned when they were fighting for the key. Hearing Nangong's words, I couldn't help but widen my eyes. Previously, when I heard about the immortal gate, I thought it was nonsense. But now, Nangong's words confirmed it. Could it be that the immortal world really existed? I was frightened and hurried to interrupt Nangong to confirm it. Hearing my question, Nangong sneered and said, "Bullshit, Immortal Gate. How could there be a way to live forever in this world?" His words confused me. If there was no way to live forever, then why did the immortal world in the jade bracelets exist? Seeing that I was confused, Nangong continued to explain, "The so-called Immortal Gate is just a gate to the mountain and sea realm. The immortal world that they want is the world inside the jade bracelet. Its real name is the Mountain and Sea Realm." Mountain and Sea Realm? I wasn't unfamiliar with this name. In the past, the evil spirit had mentioned it in front of me. When Nangong had given me the Xianyuan sword, he had also mentioned it. He said that it was the world that Shennong had lived in. After the Great War of the Wilderness, the demon folk invaded the mountain and sea realm. Later, Shennong transformed into a barrier that sealed the entire mountain and sea realm, and then vanished into the void. The metaphysical world was fighting over the mountain and sea realm, all for the sake of opening the mountain and sea realm. My expression was one of shock. Nangong continued, "The mountain and sea realm has a large number of shamans and demon folk trapped within it. It has been sealed for thousands of years, and I have no idea how the shamans are doing. During all these years, I've been preparing to open the mountain and sea realm. I want to open the gate and let the shamans out." With that, he sighed. "The shamans are already on the wane. If we don't open the mountain and sea realm, then it won't be many years before the shamans completely disappear." This time, he didn't hold anything back, and told me everything that had been on his mind. However, after he finished speaking, I recalled that in addition to the shamans, there were also the demon folk in the mountain and sea realm. According to the information that Nangong had given me, the demon folk had once invaded the mountain and sea realm. Considering the power of the demon folk, it was highly likely that there were still quite a few of them in the mountain and sea realm. If the mountain and sea realm was opened, wouldn't the demon folk also come out? Although there were demon folk like the Qingqiu tribe, they were few and far between. Normally, they lived in seclusion. However, if the mountain and sea realm opened and a large number of demon folk came out, they would definitely wreak havoc in the world. What would we do then? Chapter 8:24. Nangong's words startled me. His words clearly implied that after I die, I don't care what happens. Clearly, in order to save the shaman tribe, he didn't care about the consequences. He didn't care, but I couldn't calm down. No matter what mission I had, no matter where I came from, I was a human. There was no doubt about that. If the world was in chaos, would I be able to stand by and watch? I didn't know where I stood after receiving this sudden information. I stared blankly for a long time, not knowing what to say. At this time, Nangong said to me with deep emotion, "Although Shennong had a prophecy that the sage would come into being and our shaman tribe would rise again, a prophecy is just a prophecy. We still need to prepare for the opening of the mountain and sea realm. Although your cultivation base has reached the young god stage, it's still too low. You need to increase your cultivation base as quickly as possible." At this moment, I was confused and subconsciously asked, "What? Do you need me to do anything about this?" Nangong smiled. "The jade bracelet is in your hands. What do you think?" I smiled wryly. He was right. The jade bracelet was in my hands, and it was given to me by Bayan. No matter what was inside, I had no reason to abandon it. More importantly, the metaphysics world was fighting over the so-called key to open the gate of immortality. That key was Yi Piampian, Yi Maoan, and the others. How could I stay out of this matter when it concerned Yi Piampian? Thinking of this, I grew anxious. I quickly asked Nangong, "Since Yi Piampian and the others are the keys to open the mountain and sea realm, what will happen to them when the mountain and sea realm opens? Will their lives be in danger?" Just like when the Fire God Temple was opened, it was inevitable that there would be sacrifices involved. Could it be that when the mountain and sea realm opens, Yi Piampian and the others would have to be sacrificed? I was very anxious, so I thought of this. Nangong shook his head. This is a bit complicated. I don't know how to explain it to you. Hearing that he was trying to hide something, I became even more anxious. I hurriedly pulled his arm and asked, How complicated is it? If you want to sacrifice Yi Piampian, I will never agree to open the mountain and sea realm. When Nangong heard this, he turned to look at me, frowned for a moment, and then shook his head. The mountain and sea realm won't sacrifice Yi Piampian. They are just tokens. Furthermore, this matter had something to do with the Swanee, and if the mountain and sea realm was opened, the Swanee would definitely benefit immensely. This is definitely not a bad thing for you. When he mentioned Baian, I thought back to when he had given me the Xianyuan sword. He had written about how the demon emperor Baian had borrowed the bloodline of Shenong's daughter to escape the mountain and sea realm. Baian was Shenong's daughter. Could he be talking about Baian? But what was her relationship with Yi Piampian and the others? After the mountain and sea realm was opened, as a member of the witch tribe, Baian would naturally benefit. However, the immensely great benefit Nangong was talking about couldn't be limited to that. What exactly was it? I asked again, but this time, Nangong wouldn't say anything. He simply told me that the opening of the mountain and sea realm concerned all cultivators under heaven. When the time came, all of the major powers in the metaphysical world would gather, and many of the secluded figures would be waiting for that day. He wanted me to be mentally prepared. He didn't need to tell me that. I already knew that. Ignoring everything else, I didn't know how to deal with the sacrificial evil spirit. He was different from Nangong and Baian. He was Chi Yu, the #1 general under Demon Emperor by An's command. When the mountain and sea realm opened, and the witch tribe and demon tribe reappeared, what position would the sacrificial evil spirit stand in? What position would I stand in then? Fortunately, the sacrificial evil spirit was a member of the demon tribe, and would presumably be looking forward to the opening of the mountain and sea realm. In that regard, he and Nangong and the others shared the same interests. For the time being, there shouldn't be any conflicts. As for Yi Piampian and the others, since Nangong had assured me that they wouldn't be in any danger, I felt much more at ease. Nangong was hiding many things from me, but he had never lied to me. I trusted him in that regard. Having said all of this, I sighed. For the time being, I didn't want to think about the future. Instead, I asked Nangong, when exactly will the mountain and sea realm open? Nangong shook his head. I can't say for sure, but 9 of the 10 great divine items have already appeared. It should be soon. 10 great divine items? Could it be that the opening of the mountain and sea realm has something to do with the 10 great divine items? I couldn't help but ask Nangong. He nodded and began to explain. According to him, the opening of the mountain and sea realm didn't just require the jade bracelet and the key. The 10 great divine items were also a critical link, an opportunity. Only when the 10 great divine items appeared would the mountain and sea realm be opened. Having said all of this, Nangong waved his hand and removed the barrier. From his actions, it was clear that he had no intention of discussing the mountain and sea realm with me. I didn't pester him, and just sat there thinking. It wasn't difficult to understand why he had mentioned that the 10 great divine items were the key to opening the mountain and sea realm. Over the years, I had come across quite a few of the 10 great divine items. Back in the Jade Buddha Temple, I had my suspicions as to why the 10 great divine items would appear one after another. Now that I heard Nangong's explanation, it made sense. Since the mountain and sea realm could only be opened by me, the fact that the divine items had appeared by my side over the years was like a reminder. However, according to what he had just said, 9 of the 10 great divine items had already appeared. I only knew of 7. The Xianyuan sword had become my sword, The demon refining gourd had recognized Fatty as its master, Han Wunan had half a Nuwa stone, the Eastern Emperor Bell had been sent back to Mount Lao, the Fushi Zither was still in Chio's tomb, the Clear Sky Pagoda had left the Jade Buddha Temple and was nowhere to be seen, and the Farmer God Cauldron was right in front of me. As for the other three, I still didn't know where they were. However, from what Nangong had said, it seemed he knew the whereabouts of 2 of the divine items, although the location of the last one was unknown. I had no idea where the last divine item might be. Thinking of this, I moved closer to Nangong, intending to discuss this matter with him. At the same time, I mentioned whether or not I should collect the divine items. However, before I could finish my sentence, I thought of something. Although I already knew of 7 divine items, and all of them were more or less related to me, none of them had fallen into my hands. The most obvious examples were the Eastern Emperor Bell and the Clear Sky Pagoda. Both of them were almost within my reach, but in the end, due to various reasons, I missed them, or had no choice but to give them up. As for the other divine items, they had all fallen into the hands of others. However, after carefully analyzing the origins of those people, without exception, they were all people from the profound and Taoist sections. Moreover, they all came from sects with deep resources. Presumably, when the mountain and sea realm was opened, these people would also follow Master. When the time came, the 10 great divine items would all be gathered, and I wouldn't need to waste time searching for them. Just as I was thinking about this, Nangong brought me to the Farmer God Cauldron. At this time, the people from the Medicine King's Valley were not far away, hastily preparing something. As for Bai Ling, she flew to the Farmer God Cauldron and looked down. I couldn't help but ask Nangong about his actions. When he heard my question, he didn't hesitate and told me that the Medicine King Valley was preparing for the annual sacrificial ceremony. Hearing this, I became interested. This Medicine King Valley was a branch of the ancient Yen Emperor's tribe. Since it was a sacrificial ceremony, it must be to worship the Yen Emperor. But looking at the situation, it seemed like the Farmer God Cauldron was needed for this ritual. The Farmer God Cauldron is one of the 10 great divine weapons. It has spirituality in the first place. I comprehended this point when I saw the Clear Sky Pagoda in the Jade Buddha Temple. Moreover, this Shinnon cauldron was the vessel that the Yen Emperor used to refine medicine when he was alive, so it was the most suitable for offering to the Yen Emperor. It's just that I originally planned to come and discuss the matter of Wuyue with Bai Ling. Looking at the current situation, it seems that I'll have to wait for a while. Fortunately, I asked Lu Ruxu to take care of Wuyue and inform me immediately if anything happens. It had been such a long time, but Wu Yu hadn't sensed his movements. It seemed that Wu Yu hadn't woken up yet. In that case, there was no need to rush this matter. As he was thinking, Nangong walked towards the crowd. Seeing this, I thought that he was going to help, so I followed him. Unexpectedly, he walked to the bottom of the Shinnon cauldron and stopped. Then, he raised his head and looked up. I didn't know why, but I also followed him. But I didn't notice anything strange, so I didn't know what Nangong was looking at. Then, I saw a hint of loneliness in Nangong's eyes. I was afraid that he was thinking of the past. I didn't want to disturb him, so I walked towards the crowd alone. I wanted to see what the people of the Medicine King Valley were preparing. Before I could take a step, I heard Nangong whisper, "Soon, I've waited for so long. It's finally soon." As he said this, I could clearly feel his body trembling. Presumably, as he said, he had been waiting for the opening of the mountain and sea realm for a long time. Ever since that war, the witch tribe had rapidly declined. Moreover, after the Witch Dao War, the witch tribe had become like a rat on the street. For thousands of years, the witch tribe had been hiding. Not only did they have to avoid the pursuit of the mysterious and Taoist sects, but they also had to pay attention to the whereabouts of the Tai Sui to ensure that they could continue their cultivation. Apart from that, they also had to prepare for the opening of the mountain and sea realm. None of these things were easy. But looking at Nangong, it seemed that he was the one who planned all of these things. Although he looked a bit older than me, the emotions he showed made him seem like a participant in the war. I had my suspicions about his origin. There were some things that even the sacrificial evil spirit didn't know about, but Nangong knew. In my opinion, he was the same as the sacrificial evil spirit, an ancient person. I had never asked him about this before, and he had never mentioned it to me. But now that I saw this scene, I became even more curious, and I couldn't help but ask him. After thinking it over, I couldn't suppress the impulse in my heart. I approached Nangong and told him what I was thinking. Nangong didn't reply immediately. After a long time, he withdrew his gaze from the farmer-god cauldron. He paused for a moment, then said to me, "Since things have come to this, I won't hide it anymore. Didn't you ask me why I said that there was a divine tool that hadn't appeared yet? I had only wanted to test him, but I didn't expect that he would really tell me about his origin." His sudden change in attitude surprised me, and I didn't respond to his question. Nangong didn't feel surprised when he saw me like this. He continued, "I know about the divine tool that you've seen. I also have a divine tool on me, and I relied on it to come here." Chapter 8:25. It was a mirror. The surface of the mirror looked like white jade with strange patterns carved on it. The pendant at the bottom was woven with golden threads. After the shaman energy dispersed, the mirror exuded a pure spiritual energy. When I got close to it, I felt refreshed. I've seen a few divine tools before, but most of those divine tools had chaotic aura around them. This mirror, on the other hand, is filled with spiritual aura. I don't know what it's made from, but it's very extraordinary. No wonder Nangong would wrap it up with shaman aura. If such pure spiritual aura isn't isolated, I'm afraid it'll attract a lot of attention. The 10 divine weapons all had their names. From their appearance, I could tell that this mirror was the Kunlun mirror, one of the 10 divine weapons. According to the ancient records, the Kunlun mirror belonged to the Queen Mother of the West. It had the Tai Xian mark, which allowed it to connect the heaven and man worlds, break the space and time, and understand the mysteries of the heavens. In the legends, the Kunlun mirror was placed in the Kunlun Palace above the 9th heaven of the Kunlun Mountains. However, during the Queen Mother of the West's birthday, the mirror was stolen, and its whereabouts were unknown. After the shock from the Kunlun mirror faded, I remembered what Nangong had said. He said that he came from that time. What did he mean by that time? In the legends, the Kunlun mirror had the power to travel through space and time. Did Nangong mean that he came from the ancient time to the present time? How could it be? Seeing that I was stunned speechless, Nangong's expression remained calm as he nodded at me with a smile. "Your guess isn't wrong. I'm indeed an ancient person. With the help of the Kunlun mirror's divine power, I accidentally opened a space-time tunnel and came to this day." Although I had a guess in my heart, after hearing him confirm it, my head buzzed, and I felt a little confused. As a cultivator, I had a deep understanding of power. The reincarnation he had mentioned was related to the ultimate power of life, which wasn't something I could understand at my current realm. However, after thinking about it carefully, I could imagine it. But now, Nangong had said that he could open a space-time tunnel and travel through the ancient time. It was something I couldn't even imagine. What kind of power was that? Even the immortals who had ascended couldn't do that, could they? Otherwise, if they could travel through space and time, they could avoid aging and death. The Kunlun mirror was known as a divine artifact. Could it be that these divine artifacts really contained the power of gods? I was speechless for a long time. Nangong kept the Kunlun mirror and continued to explain to me with a smile. "So, my real identity is that of the ancient witch tribe, the descendant of Boi." Hearing his words, I temporarily woke up from my daze. After Boi, When I heard the two words, boy, I subconsciously thought of the Boyi of the late Shang dynasty, who was known by Confucius as the ancient sage. Legend has it that during the final years of King Zhou of Shang, the prince of Lone Bamboo Country was named Mo Yun. He was friendly and respectful to his younger brother, and was loyal to the king. After the fall of the Shang dynasty, and the emperor of Zhou took over the world, Boyi missed his homeland and ate the grain of the Zhou dynasty out of shame. He starved to death on Mount Shouyang. His loyalty was spread for thousands of years, and he was given the title of Boyi. He is the descendant of the Shang king. To a certain extent, he is also the descendant of Emperor Ku. In that case, Nangong is still my descendant? Just as I thought of this, I immediately reacted. This Boyi is the descendant of the Shang king. He is also the descendant of the Yellow Emperor. Nangong cultivates shaman energy. Obviously, he isn't the same person. Thanks to the time I had spent studying the ancient books, I immediately thought of another Boyi, after denying Mo Yun. The 14th descendant of the Yen Emperor and the grandson of Gong Gong were also called Boyi. Since they were in charge of the sacrificial rites of the 4 sacred mountains, they were known as the 4 clan. The Boyi that Nangong mentioned was obviously the Boyi of the 4 clan. After I sorted out my thoughts, Nangong continued to tell me about his life. According to him, he was born in the early Shang dynasty. At that time, the era of the ancient gods had ended, and the battle of the witches was at its fiercest. Because of the 100-year battle between Emperor Ku and Monster King Jun, everyone in the world was chasing after the Tai Sui and killing the witch tribe. There weren't many witch tribes left, and the people of the witch tribe were dying off. His father was the leader of the 4 clan at that time. At that time, the 4 clan didn't have the glory of the ancient times. From the moment he was born, he was always on the run. Later, his father was killed, but he escaped under the protection of his clansmen. In the end, he learned about it from his clansmen. At that time, he was young and didn't know why he was being hunted. When he became an adult, he learned about it from his clansmen. From then on, the legacy of the witch tribe became his lifelong dream. However, given the current situation, the witch tribe would soon disappear. After thinking about it again and again, he decided to find the scattered members of the witch tribe and try to unite them. However, he was too weak. Every time he found his clansmen, he couldn't protect them. He could only watch as his clansmen died one by one in front of him. In his despair, he found out the truth about the mountain and sea realm from the books his father had left him. He made up his mind to rescue the witch tribe. However, his strength alone was limited. Against the power of the ancient gods, there was nothing he could do. Later, he was hunted down and in a desperate situation, he accidentally obtained the ancient divine artifact, the Kunlun mirror. However, not long after that, he was forced into a dead end. Before he died, he recited Shennong's prophecy recorded in his father's ancient book and offered his soul and blood as an offering to the Kunlun mirror. He had wanted to increase the shaman tribe's kismet with his obsession before he died, but he did not expect that he would open his eyes thousands of years later. His story sounded like a story from the Arabian Night. However, when I thought about all the things he had done and all the things he had said to me over the years, it seemed that there was only one explanation. After thinking about it for a long time, I finally accepted Nangong's story and asked him about his relationship with the Medicine King Valley. He said that after he woke up, he searched for shamans all over the world and finally found the only remaining shaman tribe. Since then, he has been living in this place, and according to Shennong's prophecy in ancient times, he has slowly set up everything and waited for me to be born. Until that year when I met Bai-en, he sensed the birth of the Holy Maiden. After searching for a few years, he finally found me and arranged for Bai Ling to visit the Fire God Temple to search for traces of the Holy Maiden. Until everything that happened after that, he was involved in it. According to Nangong's story, I thought about it from beginning to end and finally understood the logic behind it. However, my heart ached. I didn't know what Nangong had been thinking during those thousands of years to be able to do all of this. If it were me, I wouldn't have been able to endure it. While sighing in my heart, Nangong revealed a relaxed expression as he revealed the secret in his heart. After laughing twice towards the sky, he patted my shoulder and said, "In the end, the heavens will not sever a man's path. After so many years of planning, there is finally hope. It can be said that I didn't suffer all those years in vain. Alright, let's not talk about this for now. Our sacrificial ceremony is about to begin." Then, he pulled the dumbfounded me back to the empty space next to the Shenong cauldron. Seeing me, the busy witches wanted to kneel down to greet me. After I stopped them, they didn't stand on ceremony. They said that the auspicious time for the ceremony was about to arrive, and that there were many things that had yet to be arranged. Thus, they didn't want to talk to me anymore. After getting my promise, they continued to busy themselves. The annual ceremony of the witch tribe to worship the Yen Emperor was naturally very important. I didn't dare to disturb them, so I followed Nangong and watched from the side. The witches were holding animal skulls in their hands. It seemed that they had stored them for many years. The skulls were neatly arranged in the shape of a bull. Seeing this, I remembered that the bull was the totem of the Yen Emperor's tribe. According to the ancient records, the Yen Emperor had a human body and a bull head. He grew up in Jiangshui. The Yen Emperor had a bull head and a human body. It seemed that using the totem for the ceremony was very particular. While I was thinking, the totem was completely arranged. However, the dozen of them didn't stop. Instead, they used torches to surround the totem. After doing this, those people stared at the raging flames on the torches with burning eyes. From the looks of it, it seemed that something was about to happen. However, I didn't know much about the ceremony, so I wanted to ask Nangong about it. Unexpectedly, before I could speak, Bai Ling descended from the Shenong cauldron. After she bowed to me, she didn't wait for my response and loudly announced that the auspicious time had arrived. She wanted to lead the tribe to welcome the Yen Emperor. I was stunned when I heard that. The Yen Emperor's sacred arrival? How could it be? Seeing me in a daze, Nangong explained to me with a smile, "Every year, the Medicine King Valley will hold this sacrificial ceremony in order to bring back a shadow of the Yen Emperor. That's why it's called the Yen Emperor's sacred carriage. This shadow contains the pure power of the Yen Emperor's shaman energy. It can be used by the tribe to cultivate." After explaining, Nangong gestured for me to stay where I was. He walked over and stood with the tribe members. He was the descendant of Boyi and the direct descendant of the Yen Emperor. Of course, he had to participate in this kind of ceremony. I didn't find it strange. I just stood there and thought about what he had said. Although the people of the shaman tribe in the Medicine King Valley cultivated shaman energy, I didn't feel the Tai Sui's aura after I came in. I was a little confused, but now I understood that they didn't have the Tai Sui to provide them with shaman energy. The shaman energy they needed to cultivate should be provided by the Yen Emperor's shadow in the ceremony. No wonder their population was so small. Thinking about that, I couldn't help but remember how Nangong had created the Tai Sui. At this time, the Tai Sui was hard to find. Nangong had tried his best, but he could only find another way to maintain my cultivation. It was really hard on him. While I was thinking, the people of the shaman tribe had finished their preparations. Nangong, who was standing at the front, released 2 flows of strong shaman energy from his hands and sent them to the bull totem. The 2 flows of shaman energy entered the totem. After a while, the totem gave birth to an even stronger wave of shaman energy. The moment the wave of shaman energy appeared, the flames on the surrounding torches gathered and wrapped around the wave of shaman energy, turning it into a fireball. The fireball kept growing and soon, it was dozens of meters tall. Nangong's hands moved again, and the huge fireball flew to the Shinnon cauldron in the air, falling right under the Shinnon cauldron. The raging flames burned the Shinnon cauldron crazily. After around 10 seconds, the huge fireball shrank and disappeared. It seemed that the Shinnon cauldron had absorbed it, and the shaman energy in the fireball also disappeared. As the fireball disappeared, a vague, huge shadow suddenly appeared in the void above the Shinnon cauldron. I stood far away, so I couldn't see the face of the shadow, but I could vaguely feel that the shadow had a bull's head and a human body. It should be the shadow of the Yen Emperor. At that moment, a cheer broke out among the shamans. Soon after, under Nan Gong's lead, all of them knelt down towards the illusory figure. Chapter 8:26. The scene in front of me was beyond my imagination. I could only stand on the spot in a daze, not knowing what to do. As the Yen Emperor's shadow got closer, my heart started beating rapidly. The blood in my body seemed to be boiling. My pores rapidly expanded and my face flushed red. At the same time, I felt an intense pain in my body. Even with my Yang God Celestial Master body, I couldn't withstand this kind of pain. In just a few seconds, the phantom walked in front of me and bumped into me. At that moment there was a buzz in my head. Blood started to seep out of every pore on my body. I seemed to be frozen in place. I could only watch as everything unfolded. I couldn't move my limbs at all. After a while, I had become a bloody gourd. The intense pain in my body gradually disappeared. What followed was a feeling of exhaustion. Very quickly, my body went limp and I fell to the ground. My entire body was in a state of chaos. In my haze, the shadow disappeared. Nangong Palace and the people of the shaman tribe noticed my abnormality. They gathered around me and tried to help me up. The last shadow that I saw stopped there. I had completely fainted. I didn't know how long had passed, but a light appeared in front of me. Bai suddenly appeared in front of me. However, she wasn't wearing her red wedding dress. Instead, she was wearing a long white dress. She looked as elegant as a fairy. This was the first time I had seen her wearing anything other than her red wedding dress. I was delighted. Just as I was about to call her, she suddenly looked terrified. She ran towards me from afar. Her mouth opened and closed as though she was anxiously trying to say something to me. However, there was no sound. I was stunned at first. Then, I realized that she must have met with some kind of danger and was running for her life. Realizing this, I quickly went forward. However, when I reached her, I extended my hand and tried to grab her. However, my hand went through her body and I didn't grab anything. At this moment, I realized that this was an illusion or a dream. Everything was fake. Thus, I stopped and turned to look at Bayan. At that moment, there was someone chasing after her. I stood behind them and could only see their back. I couldn't see their face. Although it was a dream, I was still curious. Seeing them running away, I quickly chased after them. In the beginning, they were so fast that I couldn't catch up to them. But just as they were about to disappear, the figure suddenly stopped. So I took a few quick steps and soon landed next to them. When I got closer, I could see that Momo's body was being lifted up by a hairy hand. She looked terrified and stretched out her hands to resist, but it was useless. When I saw the hairy hands, I was stunned. I quickly walked around him and looked at his face. Very quickly, I saw a familiar face. I have seen this face more than once. Regardless of whether it is the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum or the Qingqiu Kingdom, there are statues of him in both places. He is the initiator of the ancient war, Monster King Feng. The sudden appearance of the monster god Ling in my dream had already shocked me. However, what he did next shocked me even more. He strangled Momo's neck with one hand, while his other hand formed a sword and pointed at the space between Momo's eyebrows. Instantly, Momo's body shuddered violently. His expression became even more miserable, as though he was in unbearable pain. The space between the eyebrows was where the Life Palace was located, and also where the blood essence was gathered. Monster King Feng's finger had already sucked away Momo's blood essence. Even though it was a dream, I became anxious. I leaped up and punched at the Monster King Feng. However, just like before, my fist passed through his body and didn't have any effect. I couldn't stop this from happening, so I could only stop and stand at the side to continue watching. At that moment, a drop of fresh blood seeped out from the space between Momo's eyebrows. This drop of blood had a faint yellow glow on it. It looked rather extraordinary. Seeing this drop of blood, the Monster King Feng opened his mouth and swallowed it. Then, he loosened his grip and tossed Momo away. He then turned around and went back the way he came from. Just as I was about to chase after Momo, the Monster King Feng walked to my side. He suddenly stopped and turned his head to stare at me, as though he had seen me. There was an indescribable emotion in his blood-red eyes. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and his expression seemed to be filled with anticipation. Just as I was surprised, the Monster King Feng's figure suddenly disappeared. The scenery in front of me instantly became blurry. There were various buzzing sounds beside me, including the fatty's shouts. Hearing the fatty's voice, I instantly recalled what had happened and opened my eyes in a daze. At that moment, I was in the room that I had previously rested in. The surroundings were filled with members of the Medicine King Valley's witch tribe. The fatty was the closest to me. He looked extremely anxious and was shouting loudly. Seeing that I had opened my eyes, the fatty instantly shut his mouth and revealed a surprised expression. He continuously asked me how I was feeling. I didn't reply to him in a hurry. Instead, I closed my eyes and started to circulate the chi of witchcraft. After a few seconds, I confirmed that there was nothing wrong with my body. Then, I stood up and told the fatty that I was fine. Seeing that I was fine, the people of the Medicine King Valley quickly moved to the side. Nangong walked over and asked the people of the Medicine King Valley to leave. Only the three of us were left in the room. Just as the fatty was about to speak, Nangong waved his hand and gestured for the fatty to leave. He was the fatty's martial uncle after all. The fatty hesitated for a while and turned to look at me. Then, he nodded and left. I knew that Nangong definitely had something to ask me or something to tell me. It just so happened that I had something to ask him too. Ever since the Yen Emperor's shadow and I had looked at each other, I had many questions. What happened afterwards made me feel even weirder. Moreover, in that dream, the scene of the Monster King Feng chasing after Momo suddenly appeared. I originally thought that the dream was just my imagination and that everything that happened in it was just an illusion. However, when the Monster King Feng looked at me in the end, there was a sense of intimacy in his eyes. I really felt it. I couldn't help but suspect that the previous scene didn't just appear out of thin air, but that it really happened. Looking at Nangong's expression, could it be that he knew about it? Thinking about that, I didn't wait for Nangong to speak and asked him about what had happened previously. After listening to my words, Nangong didn't show any signs of surprise. It seemed that he really wanted to discuss this matter with me. Nangong waved his hand and gestured for me to calm down. Then, he told me the reason for the matter. According to Nangong, the reason why the Yen Emperor's shadow had caused such harm to me was because I had been disrespectful to him. Hearing that, I was puzzled. Where did the crime of being disrespectful come from? Although the Yen Emperor was the ancestor of China, he had nothing to do with me. Moreover, although I had cultivated witchcraft energy, I wasn't a witch. The witchcraft energy was obtained from the Tai Sui. Previously, when the Yen Emperor's shadow appeared, I didn't act according to the people from the Medicine King Valley because of this consideration. However, I didn't have any intentions of being disrespectful. Thinking about that, I suddenly realized that Lao Ai was the daughter of the Yen Emperor. She and I were already husband and wife in name and in reality. In that case, I was the son-in-law of the Yen Emperor. Could it be that I was punished because of that? With that thought in mind, I quickly asked Nangong if that was the reason. Unexpectedly, Nangong shook his head to indicate that it wasn't the case. Seeing him like that, my suspicions grew even stronger. That was all that I could think of. Could it be that there were other reasons? On second thought, I recalled that I was the reincarnation of the monster King Feng and Emperor Ku. Could it be that the Yen Emperor's shadow had seen through my identity, which was why he was treating me like that? However, I had seen the monster King Feng in my dream. Although I couldn't feel his aura, his appearance and actions were vastly different from mine. Moreover, I was only a reincarnation. Apart from this identity, I didn't have any other connection with the monster King Feng. The Yen Emperor's shadow shouldn't have been able to see through it. I couldn't figure out the reason behind it in such a short amount of time. Just as I was feeling anxious, Nangong looked at me with interest, as though he was enjoying my reaction. Seeing his reaction, I couldn't help but feel helpless. Immediately, I urged Nangong. After listening to me, he chuckled and told me the reason for the incident. From what he said, although the etiquette wasn't perfected in the ancient times, to the leaders of the Yen and Huang tribes, the etiquette of kneeling and kowtowing was a must, especially for their descendants who had the same bloodline. In the ancient times, the society was in turmoil and fights for power were frequent. The fight for the bloodline was even more serious. After that, to prevent such a thing from happening, the leaders of the tribes would set up a special restriction in their bloodline. If their descendants did anything disrespectful, their bloodline would be taken back. Hearing that, I was astonished. In that case, the reason why the blood in my body was surging and wanted to break out of my body was because of the restriction. However, I wasn't the descendant of the Yen Emperor. Why would I have such a reaction? Suddenly, I recalled what had happened in my dream. The monster King Feng had taken a drop of Lao Ai's blood. In that case, the monster King Feng had swallowed that drop of blood. In that case, my previous guess was correct. The dream had really happened. It seemed that the reason why I was in so much pain when I saw the Yen Emperor's shadow was because I still had Lao Ai's blood in my body. Thinking about that, I didn't want to hide it from Nangong, so I hurriedly told him what had happened in the dream. Previously, Nangong had said that he had used the Kunlun mirror to break through time and space to return to before the ancient war. As such, he knew the entire situation like the back of his hand. He probably knew about it too. Chapter 8:27. After confirming my conjecture, Nangong told me the details of what had happened that year. I learned that monster Emperor Jun had invaded the human world and fought with the Flame Emperor in the mountain and sea realm. The Flame Emperor's tribe was defeated by the powerful monster race army and was defeated in the mountain and sea realm. After the Flame Emperor was killed by monster Emperor Jun, he turned into a barrier that sealed the mountain and sea realm and imprisoned the monster race. That barrier was a secret technique of the witch race and was formed by the Flame Emperor's lifetime cultivation. Monster Emperor Jun was also seriously injured and couldn't escape the mountain and sea realm. Unexpectedly, he found a group of witch race members who were running away and learned how to escape. That method was to devour the blood essence of the Flame Emperor's kin to escape the barrier. At that time, the girl was still young and unmarried, so the Flame Emperor often took her with him. After the Flame Emperor died, the girl stayed in the mountain and sea realm. After Monster Emperor Jun learned about this, he tried his best to find the girl and found her in a few days. He took a drop of blood essence from her, which was what I saw earlier. After Monster Emperor Jun got the blood essence, he was in a hurry to leave the mountain and sea realm and didn't kill the girl. However, he didn't know that the Flame Emperor was someone who had obtained ancient divine power. He didn't have as many as 10 drops of blood essence as ordinary people. His direct descendants were the same as him and only had 1 drop of blood essence. Moreover, the blood essence contained the power of 3 souls. Taking the girl's blood essence was the same as killing her. Hearing this, my heart trembled. I saw this scene in my dream, but I woke up right after and didn't know what happened next. According to Nangong, Swan and I died after her blood essence was taken. Although it was ancient, thinking about it still made my heart ache. I was the reincarnation of Monster Emperor June. In a sense, I was the one who killed Swan and I and caused her to become a lonely soul. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but feel depressed. However, Nangong didn't pay attention to me and continued to tell me what happened next. After Monster Emperor June devoured the blood essence, it fused with his blood. The girl's power of 3 souls stayed in his body. It was only after Emperor Ku and demon god Puppet perished together that the girl's soul power reappeared in the world. However, her soul power was inevitably damaged after staying in the demon god Puppet's body for a long time. When she was born, she was already very weak and could dissipate at any time. However, the little girl was unwilling to die just like that. She had no choice but to hide in the temple of the Kanbo and use the fire-bright stone inside to repair her soul vein. Since then, she had stayed in the temple of the Kanbo for a long time. At this point, Nangong did not speak further. After listening to him, my mood fluctuated. His words revealed too much information, and it was difficult to digest all of it in a short time. Nangong gestured for me to rest for a while before he pushed the door open and left. I knew he was giving me time to calm down, so I ignored him. After Nangong left, I slowly sat down and thought about what he had just said. According to Nangong, the girl's soul was not imprisoned in the ultimate in the East Sea. Instead, she entered the temple of the Khan of her own accord to protect her soul from dispersing. At present, Lao Ai was still in the Fire God Temple, which meant that the Fire God Temple was the temple of Kanbo. However, when he mentioned the Kanbo, I suddenly remembered the silver-eyed man in the Fire God Temple, who was also known as Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi was also known as the Kanbo. His surname was Zi and his given name was Qi. He was the ancestor of the Shang tribe and the founder of the Shang dynasty, Qing Tang. That was why people called him Shang-Chi. As for the Fire God Temple, I remembered that there was a record in the ancient books. After Yao became the emperor, he conferred the title of Fire God Situ to the Kanbo. Later, he was conferred the title of King Qi Xian and was revered as the Fire God by the later generations. It seemed that the Fire God Temple had originated from there. At that time, I was suspicious as to why he had appeared in the Fire God Temple. Now, it seemed that place was where he was buried. However, he had been dead for thousands of years. Why did he become the gatekeeper of the Fire God Temple? I couldn't figure it out at the moment, but I didn't want to dwell on it. Next time I went to the Fire God Temple, I would find him and ask him. After putting this matter aside, I continued to ponder over the previous matter. However, I still couldn't figure it out. If Monster Emperor June had killed Lao Ai, why did she marry me? Could it be that it was also part of Nangong's plan? The matter between Lao Ai and me was too strange. Previously, when Nangong mentioned that he needed me to open the mountain and sea realm, I knew my mission. However, I didn't understand why King Wen of Zhou wanted to play the 8 diagrams and borrow the power of the Book of Changes to send Monster Emperor June and Gao Xian into the cycle of reincarnation. From what I knew, it seemed that this had nothing to do with opening the mountain and sea realm. Could it be that there were other plans? Thinking of this, I didn't dare to continue guessing. This matter had already exceeded the scope of my understanding. As such, I let out a long sigh and calmed myself down. Then, I left the room. At this time, Nangong was waiting outside. When he saw me, he smiled and said, "Let's go. It's time for you to take care of your business." The meaning behind his words was clear. It was time to take care of Wuyue's matter. I came here for this matter, but unfortunately, I was in time for the Medicine King Valley's sacrificial ceremony. Fortunately, I had sent Wu Yue's remnant soul into the Shenong cauldron to be nourished, so there wouldn't be any mishaps. While I was thinking, Nan Gong had already left. Seeing this, I quickly collected my thoughts and followed him. About 15 minutes later, we arrived at Bai Ling's residence. At this time, Bai Ling had finished her work and returned to the house. The fatty was also sitting inside. However, he didn't talk to Bai Ling, and his behavior was as if he was sitting on pins and needles. Presumably, because of the fatty's previous questions, the two of them had become estranged. It was inevitable that they would feel uncomfortable when they were alone. The fatty's eyes kept looking around the house. Soon, he noticed us. When he saw us, he got up and his face looked much better. Bai Ling also noticed him. She hurried to come forward and bowed. "Saint." I waved my hand, indicating that there was no need to be so polite. I told her to hurry and discuss what I was going to do today. She didn't delay. After I sat down, she told me that she had just checked in the ancient records of her clan. Using the Shenong cauldron, it was possible to reconstruct bones and regenerate muscles. They were also preparing some materials. However, they needed a rare ingredient as a catalyst, which was the key to success or failure. However, reconstructing bones and regenerating muscles wasn't a common method, and the Medicine King Valley didn't have any reserves. Bai Ling's words weren't beyond my expectations. Since it was a heaven-defying matter like reconstructing bones and regenerating muscles, it was naturally difficult. Moreover, although the Shenong cauldron was one of the 10 great divine tools, it was just a Yen Emperor's alchemy furnace. No matter how powerful it was, it couldn't create something from nothing. She said that because she wanted me to find the catalyst. The matter of Wu Yue arose because of me, so I am naturally duty-bound to look for the guiding drug. After thinking about this, I asked Bai Ling, "What is the guiding drug?" Her face was resolute as she cupped her hands at me. "It's a dragon's bone." I furrowed my brows when I heard that. I didn't expect that the rare item she was talking about was a dragon's bone. Speaking of dragons, I immediately thought of the snake spirit on my back. He was now a flood dragon, and his original form was that of a winged dragon. Using his bone might work. With that in mind, I told Bai Ling about the snake spirit and asked if it was suitable. Unexpectedly, she shook her head. Although it's a flood dragon, it's still a flood dragon. It's not a real dragon. If you want to reconstruct bones and regenerate muscles, you need a real dragon's bone. Her words made me feel disappointed. Since the snake spirit didn't work, it seemed that I could only find a real dragon. I then asked where I could find a real dragon. Bai Ling shook her head again. The dragon race is too mysterious, and there's no record of it in the records of the race. Hearing this, I was a little puzzled. Bai Ling had mentioned that it was possible to reconstruct bones and regenerate muscles in the records of the race. Lu Ruxu had also mentioned it. The Shenong cauldron was a treasure of the Medicine King Valley. It had never been lost. What Lu Ruxu had mentioned must have been done by the Medicine King Valley. Since that person had already reconstructed bones and regenerated muscles, he must have obtained a real dragon's bone. Why didn't the records of the clan mention the origin of the real dragon's bone? Bai Ling looked embarrassed when she heard my words. She said softly, "It was a time when the witchcraft was fighting fiercely. That person had a high status, and the power behind him was very strong. The Medicine King Valley didn't dare to provoke him, let alone investigate this matter." What she said was reasonable. Since that person could find the Medicine King Valley, his power was extraordinary. Moreover, he had a strong power behind him. The witchcraft were frightened by the mere twang of a bow, so how could they dare to offend him? They could only work diligently and pray for self-preservation. I didn't pursue the matter further, but looked at Nangong, who acted as if nothing had happened. Nangong held the Kunlun mirror and peered into the mysteries of heaven. He must know a lot. He might know a little about the dragon race. It was the best choice to ask him. Nangong noticed my gaze and seemed to know what I was thinking. He said before I could speak, the dragon race was originally a wild monster. After the war, they rapidly declined. Even though there are still dragons left in the world, I'm afraid there aren't many of them left. However, the person who successfully reconstructed bones and regenerated muscles is an old friend of yours. Why don't you go and ask him? You might be able to learn something. His words stunned me. Do I know that person? Judging from Nangong's background, the person he mentioned was most likely from the ancient times. Could it be Tao Wu? As soon as I thought of this, I shook my head and ruled it out. Firstly, Tao Wu was Nangong's ancestor and couldn't be considered as someone from the same generation. Secondly, it was obvious that Tao Wu hadn't reconstructed his bones and regenerated muscles. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in his current state. I couldn't figure out who it was, so I asked him again. Nangong chuckled and only said 3 words, Fire God Temple. Fire God Temple? I had already ruled out Tao Wu. Other than her, there was only the silver-eyed person in the Fire God Temple. I quickly asked, the contract? Nangong nodded slightly, confirming my thoughts. Chapter 8:28. Nangong shook his head and said, Back then, I only wanted to save my clansmen, so I didn't know much about this person. However, there's no doubt that no one can have a lifespan of thousands of years. Even with the Shenong cauldron, it's impossible to regenerate flesh and bones, so he should be a soul. As for his appearance, there aren't many ancient books left in Medicine King Valley, and there aren't any records of what happened back then, so it's hard to say. I didn't get an answer. I thought about it and didn't care too much. I obviously had to return to Fire God Temple to ask Shang-Chi where the dragon bones were. The only thing I needed to worry about was that I didn't see him the last 2 times I returned to Fire God Temple. I didn't know if I would return empty-handed this time. I judged in my heart, but I still held a cautious and optimistic attitude. I didn't see Shang-Chi the last 2 times because I didn't look for him. Maybe he was just hiding at the side and didn't want to disturb my meeting with Tao Wu. After thinking about this matter, I stood up and cupped my hands to bid farewell to Nangong. There's no time to lose. I'll make a trip back to the Fire God Temple. If everything goes smoothly, I'll immediately search for the dragon bones. After I find them, I'll return here. During this period of time, I'll need you to worry about the remnant soul in the cauldron. Nangong naturally agreed and didn't ask me to stay. He sent me all the way to the village entrance. When I passed by the Shenong cauldron, I specially checked Wu Yue's condition. I found that her soul had indeed grown a little stronger, so I felt more at ease. However, after thinking about it, I still summoned Lu Ruxu and asked her to stay here to accompany Wu Yue. Although I was trying my best to save Wu Yue, the future was still uncertain. It was hard to say to what extent I could accomplish in the end. I could only prepare for 2 things. If anything happened, I would leave Lu Ruxu behind. At least, he could accompany Wu Yue for the last part of her journey. I also left Lu Ruxu a sound-transmitting talisman so that he could contact me immediately if he found anything wrong. After explaining things like that, I brought the fatty out of Medicine King Valley and returned to Fire God Temple. Sichuan and Hubei were thousands of miles apart, but with modern transportation, it didn't take long for us to reach Shenangjia Forest. Seeing that the Fire God Temple wasn't far away, I felt a little uneasy. I didn't know if Shang-Chi was in Fire God Temple. Earlier, when Nangong mentioned that Lao Ai had entered the Kan Bo's temple, I sensed something fishy. Later on, I heard that Shang-Chi was someone who had successfully reconstructed his bones and regrown his flesh. Moreover, he had survived until now. I found it even stranger. I couldn't help but link this matter to Nangong's scheme. But for some reason, Nangong seemed to be intentionally hiding this matter from me. Previously, he had not told Bai Ling Yusher's whereabouts, causing her to be so anxious. From these two things, it seemed that Nangong had some reservations towards me regarding the matter of Nangong. The time limit of half a year wasn't up yet, and he couldn't meet with Lao Ai. He had a lot of doubts in his heart, but he couldn't ask her. He could only try his best to find Shang Qin and see if he could get an answer from him. As I thought about all this, I unknowingly arrived outside the Fire God Temple. I collected my thoughts and brought the fatty in. Inside the Fire God Temple, it was silent. On the red platform, the vermilion chair had already been erected. However, the hall was still empty, and the contract did not appear. I had already expected this, so I wasn't too disappointed when I saw this scene. The space inside the Fire God Temple was huge. Even if Shang-Chi didn't appear immediately, it didn't mean that he wasn't here. I told the fatty to split up and search with me, while I walked into the inner room. Although I knew that Lao Ai was definitely not here, I had an unrealistic fantasy. If I didn't personally take a look, I wouldn't be able to calm down. When I reached the inner room, just as I was about to push open the door to enter, I suddenly heard a rustling sound from afar. I turned to look and realized that it was coming from the forbidden area behind the Fire God Temple. I couldn't help but frown. After thinking for a while, I walked towards the source of the sound. After walking for 3 to 5 meters, a figure flashed in front of me and a tall figure stood in front of me. He was wearing a white robe with silver eyes and a stone body. Who else could it be but Shang-Chi? The reason I had come here was to find him. Seeing that he had appeared, I didn't care about anything else and quickly walked forward. When Shang-Chi saw me walk closer, he quickly bowed and greeted me, "Father." I told him that he didn't need to stand on ceremony and told him that I had come back to ask him about something important. After he nodded to show that he didn't have any objections, I told him that I wanted to find dragon bones. I also asked him in detail about how he had used the Shenong cauldron to regenerate bones and flesh. When he heard my question, he didn't seem to want to talk about his own matters and directly told me about the dragon bones. He told me that he didn't personally obtain the dragon bones that year. However, he did know the origin of the dragon bones. According to him, the dragon bones were the bones of a snake monster that had transformed into a dragon. Shang-Chi's words made me remember that when a scale insect transformed into a dragon, it would shed its mortal bones and be reborn. According to what he had said just now, the true dragon bones did not refer to the bones of a dragon after it had transformed into a dragon. Instead, it referred to the bones that had fallen from its original mortal body during this process. These bones had been tempered by the spiritual energy of the world, so their effects were not much different from the bones of a true dragon. According to the ancient records, there were as many as 9 dragon bones. Bai Ling had also mentioned that a dragon bone was enough to regenerate bones and flesh. In that case, there should be many dragon bones left in the world. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but ask Shang-Chi where he had found the dragon bones. After listening to me, he immediately said, "Kunlun." Kunlun? Was he referring to Kunlun Mountain? With that in mind, I said it out loud. Unexpectedly, Shang-Chi shook his head and said, "No. Kunlun is an immortal realm. Only those who have ascended can enter Kunlun." This is also why I said that the dragon bones shed by the scale insect could be used to regenerate bones and flesh. After the scale insect transforms into a dragon, it will enter Kunlun. Mortals can't. When I heard this, I suddenly understood. The Kunlun he had mentioned and the Kunlun Mountain in reality were 2 different places. However, I had heard from the snake spirit that the dragon realm was equivalent to the human young god's celestial master's cultivation. Why could a scale insect enter Kunlun with such a cultivation, but cultivators of the same cultivation couldn't? Shang-Chi seemed to have read my mind from my expression and explained, "Kunlun is the origin of the dragon veins. If the scale insect wants to transform into a dragon, it has to enter Kunlun." After listening to his explanation, I understood the reason. This was the same logic as when the snake spirit transformed into a flood dragon and leaped over the dragon gate. However, since the dragon bones were in Kunlun and I couldn't enter, how could I obtain the dragon bones? As I thought about this, I couldn't help but interrupt him. Seeing my reaction, Shang-Chi comforted me. Don't worry, father. Please listen to my report. Although the scale insect transforms into a dragon and enters Kunlun, the bones that have retreated are still mortal items. After the scale insect transforms into a dragon, the bones will fall from Kunlun. In that case, the people who had helped Shang-Chi find the dragon bones must have picked up the bones that had fallen. Based on that, it made sense. However, where would the bones end up? After hearing what I said, Shang-Chi hurriedly replied, although mortals can't enter Kunlun, it's fine to enter Kunlun Mountain. Previously, the people that I had sent were able to find a dragon bone in Kunlun Mountain. However, according to what I know, there hasn't been a scale insect that successfully transforms into a dragon in the past thousands of years. I'm afraid that we'll have to spend a lot of effort to find the dragon bones. Then, he didn't say anything else. From what he had said, the dragon bones that had come from Kunlun Mountain had fallen into Kunlun Mountain. However, Kunlun Mountain was 1,000 miles wide. Without special means, it would be too difficult to find it. Then, I asked Shang-Chi if there was any way to find it, or if there was anything special about the dragon bones that would make it easier to find them. Unexpectedly, Shang-Chi told me that he knew that a scale insect would transform into a dragon and enter Kunlun Mountain. That was why he had sent people to search for it. When those people arrived, the dragon had successfully transformed into a dragon and brought back a dragon bone. The so-called search method didn't exist. The dragon bone was only full of spiritual power. Apart from that, it was no different from an ordinary beast's bone. Hearing this, I couldn't help but furrow my brows. Kunlun Mountain was the ancestor of all mountains in China. It was sealed by snow all year round and was uninhabited. The Kunlun Mountain range was full of spiritual energy. If the dragon bones were hidden in the Kunlun Mountain range, spiritual energy wouldn't be able to distinguish them. It would be very difficult to find them. In that case, I could understand what Bai Ling meant by the word rare. However, given the current situation, I could only go to Kunlun Mountain to try my luck. I couldn't give up. Since I had made up my mind, I didn't think too much about it. However, I wasn't in a hurry to leave the Fire God Temple. I still had some things to ask Shang-Chi. Then, I asked Shang-Chi, previously, I read in the ancient books of Mount Longhu that after you reconstructed your bones and regrown your muscles, you only lived for 100 years. How did you survive until now? And how did you end up like this? After listening to me, Shang-Chi didn't seem to have any intention of hiding it. He became like this because he was ordered by me to protect the Fire God Temple. In that case, Emperor Ku had planned this. However, protecting the Fire God Temple didn't seem to have anything to do with Nangong's plan. There were only a few similarities, and that was all. But then, I remembered that there were many forbidden areas in the Fire God Temple. Besides Baiyan, no one else could enter those places. Could it be that Shang-Chi was really protecting those forbidden areas? Thinking about this, I couldn't help but ask about it. Unexpectedly, Shang-Chi shook his head. He didn't seem to want to tell me. However, his current appearance made me believe that it was true. Since he didn't want to tell me, I didn't need to ask about it. Since this was Emperor Ku's order, I would find out the reason one day. However, I still asked if Nangong knew about it. This time, Shang-Chi directly told me that Nangong's plan was all in Emperor Ku's control. His answer stunned me. It seemed that Nangong's plan had been predicted by the predecessors. He was the same as me. He was just a pawn. Now I seemed to know the person behind the scenes. However, I didn't know what Emperor Ku's final goal was. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.